I'm Senator Corbett. I'm the Majority Leader of the California State Senate, but I'm here today as the Chair of the Senate Select Committee on Emerging Technology, Biotechnology, and Green Jobs. And I'd like to welcome all of you here who are here, and of course all those who are watching online as well, to our hearing, which is entitled A Mindful Approach to the BRAIN Initiative. As many of you know, the acronym BRAIN stands for Brain Research and Advancing Innovative Neurotechnologies. We will begin the presentation in a moment, but again, let me just thank Chancellor Pradeep Khosla and the University of San Diego. Your hospitality has been greatly appreciated. Your staff has been wonderful, and your team has been very kind with their time and their resources. Thank you very much. Let me also, of course, thank our distinguished panelists, who I will introduce in a moment as we proceed with today's hearing. And the Select Committee very much values your time and your expertise and your participation today. Thank you all very much. Throughout my tenure in the legislature, I've been privileged to work with industry, national laboratories, and university leadership to help foster the transfer of technologies into the marketplace. These technologies lead to new life-saving cures, products and services that improve the quality of our lives, as well as, very importantly, spur our economic development and create jobs. California's people and its industries and its institutions lead in innovation. We're home to world-class universities, research and development facilities, and companies that have brought the world many technological breakthroughs. But will California lead the world in the next technological breakthrough? I believe the answer is yes. In our global economy, we will have many worthy competitors, but I know that California is up to the challenge. To remain at the forefront of the innovation in California, we must be nimble, leverage our assets, whether they be human, financial, academic, or otherwise. As a state, we must continue to cultivate an environment where it is okay to take risks and to dream big. At the most basic level, the brain is a 3-pound mass of spongy tissue, while at the most dynamic description, it is the most complex living structure known to man. I read recently that the brain is capable of storing more information than a supercomputer and creates a network of connections more complex than any social network. It controls our immune system, shapes our thoughts, our beliefs, our dreams, and our imaginations. By mapping the human brain, the BRAIN Initiative will lead to advances in neuroscience and the study of disease and biology beyond conventional academic research. It will build a foundation for more advanced research and will have practical benefits for the creation of artificial intelligence, smart machines, and new technologies beyond our current imagination and comprehension. With an economic potential that can transcend today's successes in the biotech industry and even the profound economic gains achieved nationally through the Human Genome Project, where studies have found that for every dollar invested, $140 are returned to the U.S. economy. The only question left for the state of California to ask is, how do we contribute to that objective? That's the question we will explore today in our discussions. This morning, panelists from nano and neurotechnology, biotechnology, and communication technology sectors, as well as our universities and national laboratories, have come together to share with us their vision of the BRAIN Initiative. The first panel will offer us background on the BRAIN Initiative and the importance to our nation, how it came to be, and where our panelists believe the discoveries will lead us. The second panel will explore the opportunities that the BRAIN Initiative can provide and the challenges posed in reaching its goals. And finally, the third panel will discuss how California can ensure that its universities, biotech and communications technology industries, and national laboratories can achieve the greatest success through public-private partnerships. So let us begin. I would like to introduce our first two panelists. Very, very happy and delighted and honored to have you with us this morning. First, Dr. Myung Chun is the Executive Vice President of Science Programs at the Kavli Institute. She has a PhD in molecular genetics from Ohio State University and has worked in both academia and as a scientist and project leader in the pharmaceuticals industry. Most recently, before joining the Kavli Foundation, she was an Assistant Dean of Science and Engineering at the University of California, Santa Barbara, where also she worked on program design for the National Nanosystem Institute. She was also appointed as Director of International Research Advancement at UCSB. And sitting beside her is Dr. Terrence Sanowski, a professor and laboratory head for the Salk Institute, and is a member of the National Institute of Health, the Advisory Council for the Brain Initiative, and, very impressive, one of only 13 living persons who are simultaneous members of the Institute of Medicine, the National Academy of Sciences, and the National Academy of Engineering. He's also the president of the Neural Information Processing Systems Foundation and the founding editor-in-chief of Neural Computation, published by MIT Press. Doctors Chun, Sanowski, and Greenspan, a panelist in the second panel, were instrumental in leading the way in the development and implementation of the BRAIN Initiative. And that's why we're very happy to have you all here today. So, with no further ado, let me welcome the two first panelists, and please begin telling us about the BRAIN Initiative.
Well, good morning, and thank you for convening this hearing on emerging technologies and the BRAIN Initiative in particular. We're looking forward to your questions and input today on the exciting developments in these areas. I'd like to begin the panel by outlining a brief history of how the BRAIN Initiative was born and the role that the Kavli Foundation played in the various stages of its development. The Kavli Foundation is a private foundation whose mission is to support the advancement of scientific research for the benefit of humanity and to promote public understanding of scientists and their work. And we believe that the most exciting and revolutionary discoveries in science, the ones that will truly transform science, but more importantly, society, will emerge from interdisciplinary research effort. And for this reason, one of the primary activities at the foundation is to convene and support workshops and meetings that bring together world-class scientists from different disciplinaries under one roof. We try to compel our attendees to really dream big, to think outside their own boxes, and to share their blue sky ideas freely with their colleagues. And the birth of the BRAIN Initiative came from one of these workshops. That particular meeting was held at the Kavli Center in England in September 2011. It was convened to probe opportunities at the interface between neuroscience and nanoscience. By meeting's end, scientists realized that despite of the vast improvements of neuroscience during the past decades, we actually have very little understanding of how brain really works as a whole. And the greatest scientific challenges of our time, of course, is how we process our thought, how we reason, how we learn, memorize, and feel emotions. And these abilities define us, and yet we know so little about them. And the meeting participants identified that one of the biggest bottlenecks in that capacity was that we don't really have sophisticated tools and methods to do it. So 5 scientists from the meeting had formed an ad hoc working group and began writing white paper organizing these ideas. And I'd like to emphasize that the state of California has played a critical role at this stage of BRAIN Initiative. Of those 5 scientists who wrote a white paper, 3 came from California. I think that Ralph Greenspan from UCSD is here, Paul Alivisatos of Berkeley, and Michael Ruckus of Caltech were those initial 5 scientists. And later, over 150 scientists were involved in developing this idea. Of those, 10 were leaders in making this possible. And 7 of 10 people were from California. Namely, I think Professor Tersanowski from Salk Institute, Professor Paul Weiss from UCLA, and Carl Deisroth from Stanford. And seeing its potential, we then quickly sent the paper off to the White House Office of Science Technology and Policy, OSTP, in October 2011. So in a month that we sent out the paper. And to our surprise, Deputy Director of OSTP, Tom Khalil, got back to us immediately with a very positive response. So we knew then that we were onto something. And so to further materialize this idea, then the Kavli Foundation followed up by convening 10 more meetings and workshops between January 2012 and January 2013. These meetings aim to pose right scientific questions, identify potential bottlenecks, and importantly, we envisioned a possible roadmap for the project. And during this time, the OSTP and the Kavli Foundation were engaging not only scientists, but also key stakeholders from federal agencies like NIH, NSF, and DARPA, and also other private research institutions like Howard Hughes Medical Institute, Allen Institute for Brain Science. And these activities directly led to 3 very important concept papers, one in Neuron Science and ACS Nano. And these articles, within these articles, then we proposed a national initiative for taking our understanding of the brain to next level through the development of revolutionary neurotechnologies and tools. We claimed that now was the time for a concerted, nationwide, cross-disciplinary collaboration in brain science to take shape, and that this kind of work would not only deepen our basic knowledge of brain function, but also advance medical treatments for brain diseases and galvanize new industries at unprecedented levels. And our efforts eventually culminated in the East Wing of the White House on April 2nd, 2013, when President Obama announced the BRAIN Initiative as a 21st Century Grand Challenge. And this was obviously a thrilling and if hard-fought moment for, I think, all the scientists and other members who were involved in generating this initiative possible. But I also like to think it represents the powerful results that can unfold when scientists, private and public institutions, and agencies come together to support each other. And I understand that scientific funding is at great risk for the moment, and it's a very hard time. But I really like to think that this inspirational initiative can really bring all of us together, and then we can make really big difference. And I think that dream big, as Senator mentioned, is very important because it can now then materialize something that we all would aspire to. So thank you for having me here.
Thank you very much. Dr. Sanowski.
Yes. Well, thank you, Senator, for helping to organize this meeting. I think this is California's leading the nation. Just want to clear up a little discrepancy. My lab is at the Salk Institute, but I'm also a professor at UCSD. In fact, I'm unique in that respect. I'm a professor at both places, and Howard Hughes pays my salary. So as Myung mentioned, our president announced on April 2nd this new initiative. And the BRAIN initiative, the operative letters in BRAIN initiative are the last two, IN, Innovative Neurotechnologies, because this primarily is an effort to bring together engineers and life scientists to really tackle the, I think, premier problem of our century. You mentioned that in the last century, we went to the moon. That was John F. Kennedy's initiative. We explored the planets, and that's the exploration of outer space. Well, in this century, we're going to be exploring inner space. Now, what is the BRAIN Initiative? Well, first of all, we want to do with the innovative technologies that we're going to be developing. We want to be able to construct a dynamic picture of brain function. That means activity, both electrical activity and chemical activity, that will allow us to integrate the neuronal circuitry over space and time to understand behavior. And it's the link between the activity and the behavior that is the biggest mystery. And having new approaches to do that is going to allow us not only to understand how the brain works, but hopefully to be able to help those that are suffering from brain disorders, and also to build devices that have capabilities similar to those of our brain. Now, if one looks at this diagram, these are the different levels of investigation. At the bottom is molecular level, at the very highest resolution, and then at the very top, the entire central nervous system, 11 orders of magnitude of spatial scale in between, and they're all important in the brain. Now, we know an enormous amount down here at the very bottom because we have a parts list. And we know a significant amount about how the global organization of the brain is organized because of the fact we have brain imaging techniques, but it's a very low spatial and temporal resolution. The area we know least about is in the middle here, and that's the level of the circuit or network where you have a large number of neurons, typically many thousands, interacting very tightly and densely, and being activated by the sensory input and making decisions and planning on different parts of the cortex, as shown here at the top. This is the wiring diagram of the cortex. Now, when one goes to the textbook, one sees pictures like this. This is from Cajal. It's going back more than a century. And this is, the neurons come in many different sizes and shapes. And this is a pyramidal cell from the cortex, around 10,000 synaptic inputs, so a very high degree of connectivity. However, this is very misleading, because if you look at the neural circuit, what you're not seeing here is all the other neurons that are around it, connected to it. In fact, it's densely packed in 3 dimensions. And so that makes it very difficult to study and also even to visualize. But what I want to do is to show you very briefly what a neural circuit actually looks like. And if we could have the, click the movie. This is a reconstruction that was done in collaboration with Kristen Harris in my lab. This is one of those dendrites. It's a very small piece of the dendrite, about 5 microns, with 75 of these synapses. You can see there, synapses are formed on these little spines that are coming off the main shaft of the dendrite. And the electrical activity from these inputs goes all the way down below the level of this auditorium into the soma, which generates an all or none action potential. Here are the axons now that connect directly to that one little patch of dendrite. There are 75 of these axons. And if you listen carefully, you'll hear Blue Danube Waltz in the background. Now, in addition to neurons, the brain also has glial cells. And this is an example of an astrocyte. This is a single cell that surrounds all of the synapses and axons and dendrites in that little piece of brain tissue that is shown here. By the way, this is from a part of the brain called the hippocampus that's very important for memory. So you can see it all fits together like very intricate Chinese puzzle. Okay, now we're going to go down inside of the neuron, and this is equally complex and important, the machinery inside of the cell. You're just seeing a few parts. This is the power pack called the mitochondria, and there's, in red here, there's other organelles that are very important for these chemical signaling inside the cell. So this is a sense of the different scales. Now we're really at the level of below the light microscope level. This is all done with EM reconstruction. Now, just to show you, this is like the Fantastic Voyage, if you ever saw the movie from the 60s. We're going to go through a tunnel. This is one of those spine necks, about a micron long. And as you can see, as we get to the end of it, we're going to see the business end of the synapse. This is where the signaling takes place in the so-called postsynaptic density. And now we're going to go through, pop out, look back, and see the axon that feeds this synapse. So this is a sense of what it's like if you could shrink yourself down to the level of the actual machinery inside in the brain. We can turn the movie off now, and I will go on to the next slide. So that just gives you a flavor of what it's like to be inside the brain, and also what the challenge is, because we have to untangle all of those connections. Now, on April 2nd, this picture was taken just before the announcement, and you can recognize Bob Kahn, Miyun Chun, representing the Kavli Foundation, Francis Collins, representing the NIH. He was asked by the president to lead the NIH as the lead agency on the BRAIN Initiative, but also representatives from the Allen Brain Institute, Alan Jones, Party Prabhakar, who is from director of DARPA, and the interim director of the NSF, and the president's ethics panel, Amy Gutman. So this is, and Bill Newsom, and who is one of the chairs of the BRAIN Initiative committee that the NIH has asked us to write a report that was delivered on September 16th. So these are the three agencies that are contributing. The total sum for fiscal year 2014 is $110 million, which even, I think, by California standards is a rounding error. But that's because it's the first year. And you know, it's really important to plan. And so really the first year is really a lot of efforts being put in, not just by the NIH, but also DARPA and the NSF, to try to come up with a plan, goals, milestones, priorities. And this is what we were asked to do with the working group. Now, the real problem with a committee of 15 is that, of course, everybody has a different idea about, you know, what's important. And indeed, we came up with a report with 58 pages, just chock-a-block with all kinds of ideas. But we did eventually have a series of meetings in 4 different locations and on different topics ranging from molecular approaches, human neuroscience. This is a very important one because that really is important because NIH's mission is to try to help humans, and specifically mental disorders. I helped organize one of the meetings on theory, computation, and big data. We're going to be generating huge amounts of data, and we have to be able to analyze it, model it, and to be able to extract theoretical principles that then can be taken to the workbench. And finally, recording technologies, and this is important for the brain activity map that Ralph will be leading. So the report identified 6 important guidelines, and these are kind of general principles. And I'm just going to mention a few of them. First of all, sharing data. This is very important. Right now, this is common practice in molecular genetics and in X-ray crystallography. It is not a common practice in neuroscience, and it needs to be done. And Myung and Ralph and I discussed how we're going to go about doing that this morning. It's really important to consider ethical implications, not only for doing the animal research, but also for bringing those tools and techniques to humans. And it has to be done in a we're tinkering with the most important part of the human being, which is their minds. And so we want to be able to be very careful about how we do that. We came up with 9 recommendations, and the NIH is using these now as we speak to develop requests for proposals. These are mechanisms, funding mechanisms, that then will be allow researchers all over the United States to apply for grants and projects, funding for projects. Again, I'm not going to go through all of these except to say that the vision here is to identify all the different types of neurons, how they're interconnected. That's an anatomical issue. But then to map the activity in these neurons onto the anatomy. That's a physiological pillar. And then ultimately use that to explain behavior. So there are 3 pillars: anatomy, physiology, and behavior. And those have to be integrated in a way that they haven't been so far. There are neuroscientists working in each one of those areas. It's very difficult to make the connections. And there's one other issue, too, which I think is equally important, which has to do with, as we create these new techniques, we have to disseminate the techniques so that all neuroscientists have access to them. We have to be able to train students, for example, in how to analyze the data. We need summer schools. We need ways of bringing all of that knowledge to the public. Briefly, this is something now that is going on. Jeffrey Ling is a deputy director at DSO in DARPA, is leading the charge. DARPA has been very successful already in developing new sensors, reporters, and neuroprosthetics. They have made a big investment in recording from the motor cortex of the brain and allowing a paraplegic to be able to guide a robot arm to pick up a cup of coffee for the first time, to be able to operate something outside their body. The NSF had a workshop last May and is continuing to have a series of workshops. There's a report coming out very soon from this workshop. And finally, let me just say that in addition to all the technical parts of this project, there's another part which I think is equally important, and it has to do with leadership and the intangible parts of what is it that excites young people's minds. It's the challenge, it's the adventure, and we really need to be able to attract the best young minds in the same way that John F. Kennedy did when he announced in 1961 that our country was going to the moon. Now, at the time he made the announcement, nobody knew how to do it. We didn't have the materials, we couldn't build a big enough rocket, we didn't have the electronics to bring the astronauts there and back. Now, in 1969, when Neil Armstrong set foot on the moon, the average age of the engineer at NASA was 26. Now, if you think about it, right, that was 8 years later. So they were 18. The average age of the engineer at the time of the announcement was 18, which means that most of them were in school. And that's what it takes. It requires an enormous effort that is going to redirect talents in our country toward this grand challenge, which I think our president has now put before us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Let's give a round of applause to the first panel, please. Dr. Sanowski, I think you make another very important point. Those 18-year-olds were probably inspired by the leadership that they were seeing to enter the fields that they did, to become the amazing scientists of the future that made these things happen. So I think that's a very important point to make as well. So I have a few questions. And on that note, I note that there's probably some students in the audience. Are there some students here joining us today? Raise your hands. Thank you so much for being here. This is one of the important reasons why we bring a hearing like this to a college campus where we can see an intersection between the legislature and science. That doesn't happen every day, but it's very important to make that happen more and more. And I just might point out, over the last few years, a science fellowship program has been developed at the state capitol where we actually have science students working in legislative offices. And that might sound like something we should have been doing all along, but it's a very important step to allow individuals who are knowledgeable in science, which many of us legislators are not, to maybe look at careers to deal with that intersection between science and the legislature to make change. So I just want to make that point while I had an opportunity. So just a few questions. Let me ask you, why is this the right time for this sort of project to go forward?
This is really an extraordinary moment for neuroscience. And it's like spring, and all the daisies are coming up. And in fact, I think what the Brain Initiative recognizes is that there already were about a dozen projects that were already launched. Howard Hughes, for example, has launched now over 5 years ago, Janelia Farm, and they're trying to create brain activity maps of the fly. The Allen Brain Institute has now also been refunded by Paul Allen to the tune of $300 million to develop brain maps of the mouse, and specifically the visual system. And the Gatsby Foundation and Charitable Trust in England is putting up a building for studying neural circuits. So this is already, the daisies are coming up all over the world, but what was needed was a way of integrating, and you also know the Human Brain Project, and it was announced in January in Europe. So what we really need is to be able to integrate and coordinate all these efforts. And so this recognizes something that's already ongoing, but now this is going to speed things up. And the key, I think, is to accelerate progress so that rather than taking another 100 years to get to the point where we want to be, we'd like to be there in 10 or 15 years.
And also time is right because of the development of technology in biology sector. I think that maybe 3 decades ago, Department of Bioengineering didn't exist, but it does. I mean, for example, in San Diego, bioengineering is a hugely important department as well as as its impact in biology is tremendous. In addition, there had been other national initiatives in the past. For example, National Nano Initiative by President Clinton in 2000 and on had made tremendous difference in tool developments as well as materials and so on that can be employed in biological studies. We should not forget that the initiative that occurred in California among Cal IT2 in this campus, CNSI, and QB3, and other large initiatives that had occurred in California made unbelievable improvements in merging between biology and physical sciences and engineering. These large activities combined together today, it's possible for us to envision Brain Initiative. Beforehand, it could not be possible.
Well, thank you very much. Do we know yet what focus the research dollars will be made available to? And will they require matching funds? Do we know how the funding will work towards the future yet? Has that been developed?
So you're specifically
the federal
at the
funding.
federal level.
Yes, sorry.
Well, each of those agencies has its own way of distributing and creating their granting program. The NIH, as I said, is going to announce later this month their own funding mechanisms. We have recommended very strongly that the money be given to teams, and is specifically for developing and seeding new proposals for new technologies. Now, that doesn't have matching funds, but we, as you know, when you're doing seed funding, you really need to tap into other sources because it's not going to be enough to really develop a whole program. But fortunately, we have here, through the leadership of Pradeep Khosla, our chancellor, a center which is, in fact, going to provide a seed funding program internally. And in fact, we are already off the ground in terms of getting together the engineers and the biologists. So this is really something that's been going on since April, the last 6 months. In fact, I think we set a record for the shortest amount of time it takes to start a center here.
We like the sound of that. Maybe we could borrow you in Sacramento. Or send you to Washington, D.C. Oh, did I say that? I'm sorry, Dr. Chen.
But we're really at a very critical juncture of this initiative where states like California, who intellectually have led this initiative, if there could indeed be an early investment from the state, this can make huge difference for national initiative, but the outcome for California is going to be immense because at the end of the day, it's a national initiative with a lot of funds. But more importantly, data set that will be harnessed in early on could be directly employed in new kinds of industries that we don't even yet know. And these are things that can happen in California with all the investment. So we think that that's the key for the moment. The success of this national initiative hinges on what state like California can do.
Yes, thank you. I'll be looking forward to continuing the discussion about that, how California can assist in the development of this initiative. Just one last question. Do we have any lessons that we can learn from the Human Genome Project and going forward with the Brain Initiative?
Yeah, so as you pointed out, the Human Genome Project had more than just a biological impact. It really transformed biology, the way biologists ask questions and now whole genome-wide answers. But it created an industry. The genomics industry now is a major industry here in San Diego and in the country as a whole. The cost of sequencing a genome has gone down by a factor of 1 million over the last 15 years. We want something similar to happen for the Brain Initiative. We believe that we can create a whole new sector of industry. San Diego, in particular, I think is very well positioned, not only because of the fact that we have a terrific faculty and a critical mass of neuroscientists here, but we have the premier telecommunications companies that are based here, like Qualcomm, and their information technology. And so if you really think about the brain is all about information and manipulating information, transforming it, using it. And in a sense, those two sectors really are poised here to be able to help each other, to be able to take us into this next phase, I think, of development.
And I was in the middle of actually genomics era. My work as a project leader at Millennium Pharmaceuticals was doing functional genomics work. And I think that one thing I learned through that experience is that when Genome Project began, the promise of the outcome was supposed to cure so many diseases once we had encoded our the DNA coding. I think this is something that we must be very careful about, not promising something that will be the direct output of BRAIN initiative. Of course, the potential is unimaginable. But to clarify, oh, we're gonna now then cure Alzheimer's diseases as long as we have BRAIN initiative, is, I think, perhaps misguiding kind of promises. So we need to be extremely careful as we move forward, what is going to be possible and what is going to be feasible.
All right. Thank you very much. Can we have another round of applause for this great panel? Thank you very much. I will now introduce the next panel. This panel is entitled Facilitating Success, the Role of Research, Institutions, and the Private Sector. So with us today are Dr. Ralph Greenspan. He's not only one of the scientists that helped form the working group that proposed the BRAIN initiative, he's also the director of the Center for Brain Activity Mapping here at UC San Diego, the university's program to accomplish the goals of the BRAIN initiative proposal. Additionally, Dr. Greenspan is the associate director of the Kavli Institute for Brain and Mind here at UCSD and a professor in residence at UCSD's Division of Biology. Also with us, Dr. James Shuck is the director of the Imaging and Manipulation of Nanostructures Facility at the Molecular Foundry at Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory. His current research focuses on the effects on light materials and the nanoscale, benefiting the fields of medicine, energy, computing, and many other disciplines. He has a BA in physics from UC Berkeley and an MA and PhD in applied physics from Yale University. Dr. Shuck is the recipient of the 2013 R&D 100 Award and the 2013 Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory Directors Award for Exceptional Achievement in Advances in Nanoimaging. Also with us is Dr. Todd Hilton, the Senior Vice President of the Brain Corporation. His current position focuses on business and technical strategy and the development of hardware and software inspired by neural systems for application in robots. He has a BS in physics from MIT and a PhD in applied physics from Stanford University. Prior to joining the Brain Corporation, he worked as a program manager at the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, affectionately known as DARPA, and led a group of scientists and engineers working in advanced materials and nanotechnology for SAIC. Also with us is Ms. Gail Medeiros, the president and CEO of Bay Bio, an industry organization representing Northern California's biotech industry. She received her BS from UC Berkeley and MBA from Harvard Business School. She's a former biotech CEO, and I think that's when I first met you. Ms. Medeiros is deeply committed to supporting the industry through development, peer-to-peer experience sharing, as well as education and workforce development. Panelists, welcome to the Select Committee, and please begin our discussion.
Thank you very much, Senator Corbett, for convening this hearing. It's a real privilege for us to be able to tell you about what we are trying to do, what we believe we can accomplish, and how it relates to the state of California.
Thank you.
There are many challenges and opportunities associated with this BRAIN initiative, and we believe, as has been said earlier, that California is ideally poised to play a national leadership role in this, in part because of the very high concentration of talent in the state, both in terms of research and also in terms of technology, development and commercialization, and also because of our spirit of adventure, our spirit of innovation, and our unparalleled propensity for doing things together, which is a real exception across the country and across the academic world. So What are the challenges? We have many very large challenges. We have intractable brain diseases, such as schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, autism is another one. These are all diseases of mentality, in a sense, of the fundamental sophisticated aspects of how the mind works. And it's become increasingly clear that these are whole brain diseases. These aren't diseases of one little corner of it, but because the brain works in a global way to do the sophisticated things that we do, they go awry in these diseases. And because we still only have a very, very crude picture of what occurs in the brain at that scale, we barely know what is wrong in these diseases at this point, let alone how to approach trying to correct them. For diseases that involve injury to the brain, traumatic brain injury, and degeneration of the brain, Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, in these cases, we also need to be able to see it at a global scale. For traumatic brain injury, because we still have very little idea of what actually happens to the brain in such injuries, and they are very widespread. It's not just the military in Iraq and Afghanistan. It's people who've been in car accidents, sports playing, many, many different situations. And there is, at this stage of medical history, almost nothing, or perhaps I can say virtually nothing, that can be done to treat this effectively. In the case of the degenerative diseases, the best hope that the drugs that are now being developed for them can offer is to arrest the process of degeneration. That means that we need to know as soon as absolutely possible when the degeneration has begun, so you can stop it before it does great damage. The best way to do that is to have the subtlest picture of what the brain does so you can begin to see when it goes awry. At this point, we do not have that. So that's the medical aspect of the scientific challenge. We need to see more. We need to see it at higher resolution. We're very good, as Terry said, at knowing what goes on in the individual cell. We have a couple of techniques, including the picture on the right, which is a picture of functional magnetic resonance imaging, fMRI. That gives us a very crude picture of the whole brain. But it is in many respects very misleading, because we see little areas in which there's greater amounts of blood flow. That's a very indirect measure of activity, and the activity is far more widespread than what you see in the way these images are processed to get an average value out of individuals. And the resolution is extremely crude in terms of detail and nothing at all about circuitry. So we need to be able to obtain a much more complete functional description of this circuitry, a goal not unlike that of the genome. What we can do with that will allow us to actually understand the kind of strategies that the brain uses to accomplish these things. Maybe it's a code, maybe it's more of a pattern process. We don't know. We have to test theories to ask that. This is far more than any individual laboratory could ever do, even if they were an immense laboratory. The medical goals. In the short term, this will undoubtedly give us better means for diagnosing things and earlier diagnosis. But more importantly, it will give us an important window into the real emergence of these diseases, their pathophysiology. And in turn, this opens the way towards novel therapeutics. On the way to getting there, and among the first steps that have to be taken, are to produce the tools to get us there. And this is one of the answers to your question of why now, because as Myung said, there have been breakthroughs in nanoscience and in chemical probing and in recording techniques that begin to show us a glimmer of how we might solve these problems. But we only have a glimmer. We don't have them in hand yet. So they need to be developed. Every single one of them will be a technology with very broad application, not just to the brain, but to any disease that you need to monitor what's going on in the body in real time. like watching how a tumor responds to treatment immediately, not 3 months later to see if it got bigger. Watching what goes on in the liver if somebody's trying to control their diabetes. And beyond medicine and beyond biology, these will be sensor technologies and transmission technologies that will have broad applications in the economy. Hence, the potential for return on investment. And as has been mentioned, and as is one of our main goals with our center here at UCSD, the training of a new generation of scientists at ease in all of these different disciplines. And we are already aware that our largest company in town, Qualcomm, wants to hire people like that. So we know that there are jobs, and other companies will follow in Qualcomm's footsteps. So what does it need? It needs collaboration among many institutions. And part of the effort of our center here at UCSD has been to start building those collaborations. We've had a series of meetings. We've had people come from out of town. We've paid them to come participate in our meeting. People from Berkeley, people from Santa Barbara. We have already set up collaborations. Jim Shuck, on my right, and I spent last night at dinner making specific plans for how we're going to work on this project together. And so it's already happening, and you don't have to push anybody to get them to want to do this. Everybody wants to be part of it. So hence why we are so ideally poised and our first steps. But beyond the academic, there is an enormous potential here for public-private partnerships. And there's history for this. The Cal IT2 initiative, which I know most about because I'm here at UCSD and know the people who brought it into being, they benefited enormously from such partnerships. They used the state initiation of an effort to do an enormous amount of matching fundraising. And we believe that because of all the technologies that are going to come out of this, we have that potential as well. Why is it necessary for the state to do something if the government is going to do something? In part, it's not just because, as we've seen in the past 2 days, the government has trouble functioning, but it's also because...
Excuse me, but not the state government.
The federal.
We're here, we're open.
No. I'm sorry. My mistake, I apologize. I meant the federal government. That the federal government has shown us just how effective they can be in the past 2 days. But beyond that, there's also a culture of caution in the federal funding agencies that has grown more and more prominent over the course of the past couple of decades. And as has been said, this is a project that requires people to think big, to dream big, and to reach very far. And if you reach very far, whether or not you actually attain your ultimate goal, you will attain a great many valuable goals along the way. That's what we need to be able to jumpstart in California. That's what we can do better than others. So with that, I will conclude and say that I think that this is the time, this is the place, and we are the folks to do it.
I agree. I'll second that motion. Thank you, Dr. Greenspan, and thank you very much also for writing the op-ed in the paper this morning. Appreciate that. Dr. Shook.
Thank you. Yeah, so start by saying this is really exciting to be here for this mindful discussion about the brain. It's certainly a topic that I think warrants this bigger picture look that it's getting right now. And I believe, now is the right time to be having this dialogue. So thank you, Senator Corbett and other committee members for focusing on this. My name is Jim Shuck. I am the director of a place that's called the Imaging and Manipulation of Nanostructures Facility. That's located at the Molecular Foundry. The Molecular Foundry is a national nanoscience research center, which is housed at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab and is part of the larger scientific community there at LBNL. I think as a nanoscientist, and not a neuroscientist or a biologist by any means, as a nanoscientist who works in a national lab, I think I'm here to offer perspective from the National Lab and from nanoscience on how we can help the brain. I think this is relevant because, as we just heard, LBNL, but really California in general is a leader in nanoscience. So let me first start by telling you a little bit more about where I work. And actually, I should start that by just reminding everyone where nanoscience got its name. So nanoscience deals with the study of materials at the nanometer length scale. So a nanometer is about 100,000 times smaller than the width of a human hair. It's about the size of a small molecule. So the foundry opened its doors about 8 years ago or so. It really itself is a giant experiment. Nanoscience, very much like the Brain Initiative and the Brain Activity Mapping Project, is inherently multidisciplinary. And so the idea was to start an institute and put a bunch of people who have very different backgrounds but who all nominally work at the nano length scale, put them in a building and hope they talk to one another. And it turned out to be actually even more successful than even I thought it would be. This has actually resulted in great breakthroughs in basic science, but also it's ended up turning into some very large industry collaborations, and even is starting to have its effects felt in terms of spin-off companies and things like that. As I mentioned, the Molecular Foundry is located at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. Lawrence Berkeley National Lab is itself located right next to UC Berkeley campus, right up the hill, so we're adjacent to UC Berkeley campus. And I think that lends itself to a very unique sort of research environment. Inland from us, about 40 miles, is Lawrence Livermore National Lab, so we are not Lawrence Livermore National Lab, although we collaborate with them a fair amount. So LBNL, one thing that's different between LBNL and Lawrence Livermore, really most other national labs, is that we don't have any classified work that goes on at Lawrence Berkeley. National labs play a unique role in the sort of national R&D ecosystem. They were conceived of and built to take on national grand challenges in science. They do this through mechanisms that include multidisciplinary collaborations, through tech development, and through really the creation of facilities that concentrate and deploy scientific advancement. This really isn't how really academia or industry is set up to operate, and so LBNL brings, I think, tools. LBNL National Labs in general bring tools, team approaches, cross-disciplinary excellence that I think really could be useful for the Brain Initiative. It'll not only help pioneer new discoveries, but also allow these discoveries to be scaled up to the point where they might actually help sort of society at large. As we heard, LBNL is already exploring potential strategic collaborations. For example, I know Paula Vasados, as you heard, was one of the sort of people involved in the early discussions of this Brain Initiative, has spoken with Ralph a lot. It was just announced that there's now a Kavli Institute for Nanosciences that's showing up in Berkeley. Obviously, there's the Kavli Institute for Neuroscience down here, so there are already a number of sort of natural interactions that are going on there. We're also engaged in multi-institutional planning sessions with UC Berkeley and UCSF. And all of these, I mean, part of the reason we're having these discussions, of course, is to be best positioned for going after federal funding. But I think really, more importantly, these discussions can potentially drive or really help shape a potential California-wide effort on brain, and that will turn really California into a leader in this effort. It's also worth noting that LBNL has done an excellent job, I think, of demonstrating these types of partnerships, in particular public-private partnerships, work. We've already heard about the Joint Genome Institute that came about from Human Genome Project. More recently, LBNL spearheaded the Joint Bioenergy Institute, or JBAE. JBAE is a partnership between Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, Sandia National Lab, the Carnegie Foundation, UC Davis, UC Berkeley, Lawrence Livermore National Lab. Seen in Washington as sort of a model of public-private interaction, not that we necessarily want to be emulating Washington right now. The science that has emerged has been both use-inspired, but also has broken new ground in basic energy sciences. And it's really built multiple industry partnerships and has a track record of generating IP at a rate that is twice that of the three leading universities in the US. So these things work. So let me say just a few words then on brain-related topics specifically. From my perspective, the major brain goals are summarized in the quote from President Obama, in which he said that the brain is about giving scientists the tools they need to get a dynamic picture of the brain in action. So it'll promote and leverage advances in physical and engineering sciences to solve fundamental neuroscience problems. We want to use the brain as a model for designing next-generation computer architectures, and it'll really make substantial impacts, as we've just heard, right, in basic discovery in human health. Right, it's believed that diseases like epilepsy, dementia, autism emerge when large-scale interactions in the brain are disrupted. And so if we can understand those, then we can begin to maybe treat them. It also make impacts in information technology. I think in short, it'll help people a fair amount. So right, part of the purpose of this panel is to discuss challenges and opportunities facing this project. And so I'll sort of highlight what I see as a couple of these as related to nanoscience. I think the challenges, have already been laid out in a sense. This is really a problem of immense scale, right? 10 to the 11 neurons, spiking frequencies greater than a kilohertz. So you need to be able to monitor and ultimately control brain circuits, and really the whole brain. And that means multi-scale analysis is needed. And this multi-scale analysis is what essentially means you have to take a necessarily cross-disciplinary approach to attacking this problem. What role can nanoscience play? I think the contribution of nanoscience isn't necessarily in that we're going to go in and look at every single molecule in the brain all at once and watch everything move around. I think you sort of lose the forest through the trees there. I think the main contribution comes from technologies that have already been developed and are being developed, actually already to chase other problems, and deal with other needs in other areas right now. So, what types of things have been developed? We've already been making novel materials, novel nano building blocks such as quantum dots and nanowires that now can have their properties tailored so that you can imagine them going in and being used to study disease and maybe even to treat it. You can begin to shape and mold and put together these building blocks and these new materials now in ways that weren't possible before through advances in nanofabrication. This allows us to create ultra-sensitive detectors, little circuits, transducers, interrogators, if you will, that can now go in and look and see what's happening inside your brain potentially, and even send signals back out. Cutting-edge characterization methods have been developed that now allow people to go in and see what's happening with higher resolution, again, better sensitivity. And I think it's also particularly important to note that the key role that nanoscience has played in sort of being able to handle the big data problem. So, right, we want to look at smaller and smaller things over larger and larger areas. This turns into a lot of data, a lot of information, but how do you extract that information? So you need to be able to gather it, but also share it, manage it, and analyze this kind of data. And so these are problems that we've started to tackle in nanoscience, but I think need a lot more attention. And brain is good motivation for doing that. So to get to specific opportunities, I think there are a number of things that can be done now and a number that can be done in the future. I think already a good example of what can be handled now if one were to just take nanoscience and apply it to the brain, if you look at these electrodes that are used for things like electrocorticography, these are arrays of electrodes that people put directly on your brain to measure brain activity, typically, so often used, for example, to study epilepsy patients, sort of pre-surgical treatments, to see what's going on before they go in and have surgery. These arrays have electrodes that are spaced by centimeters, and there are typically 100 of them or so in any given array. People think that you could do a lot more, you could learn a lot more if you actually put these electrodes a lot closer together and you had a lot more of them. That nanofabrication can allow that to happen pretty much right now, and in fact, we actually have ways of handling that much data already if people were to just start using these, if you got the right people at the table to start talking about approaching these problems. Sort of in the long run, if you really want to be able to go deep into tissue and see what's going on, you're going to need to be able to have, people talk about having millions of sort of minuscule little circuits implanted in your head that can not only measure what's going on, but want to wirelessly communicate back out to you, to a computer or something, what is actually happening inside your brain, but also maybe then to use that information to control things external to yourself. So you can imagine this really revolutionizing brain-machine interfacing and interactions and prosthetics, for example. I think if one uses the outcomes of the National Nanoscience Initiative, or even the recent revolution in clean tech, or of course the Human Genome Project, I think it's fair to say that the economic impact of the BRAIN initiative will be significant, expanding both existing efforts, but also really opening major new markets. But what's needed right now is the development, I think, of bridging technologies. There has been a significant effort in people developing technologies for one reason. There's been significant development of people doing neuroscience with other motivations, and these people need to start talking. So, having said all this, I think, right, you have the ability to stimulate this kind of research. This effort will not only lead to breakthroughs in basic science and research, but I think if taken on in California, it allows the state to maintain, of course, its cutting edge in R&D, but it also made California the leader in this field, setting it up for really sort of the long-term benefits that come out of such an effort that include more recent tech jobs, but also things like potential manufacturing that come down the line from these discoveries. Again, the opportunity to support this both by providing funding, but really by encouraging and driving the collaborations that need to occur to make this effectively take off.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shuck. Dr. Hilton.
Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to be here. I thought I would start by saying a little bit about Brain Corporation as a way to sort of set the stage for things I'm going to do later, and also because I suppose that many of you wonder who we are and what we're doing. We haven't said a lot about that yet, so I'll say some things about it now. So Brain Corporation was founded almost 4 years ago by Eugene Izhikevich, who's a well-known computational neuroscientist. And we are sponsored by and collaborate closely with Qualcomm, without whom we could not possibly exist, and we share many interests in common with Qualcomm. So the problem that we're trying to solve, basically, is that robots are stupid. You can't really get a robot to do what you want it to do very easily. And I often say to people, how many robots did you see today? And the answer is usually 0 or 1 if they have a Roomba. And I'm not criticizing the Roomba, it's just that the Roomba is sort of the state of the art in the small robotic technology today. And for that reason, there aren't a lot of robots in our daily lives. We're certainly nowhere near the Jetsons, right? So the point there is that I think there's a huge opportunity here that is as yet untapped. And it's not tapped because we don't know how to do some of the basic things that we need to know how to do. The problem with robotics today, and my motivations here, by the way, I'm going to come at this from the perspective of someone who's trying to build a business, so I'm going to talk about economics and technology more than science. I can talk about the science stuff too, but today I'm going to talk about the economics and the business aspects. So the problem with robotics today is that the technology essentially is unscalable. And it's unscalable because most robots need a human attached to them very frequently or even all the time to make them work. So if you have an application in the Defense Department, you're going to fly a drone and you can put 100 humans on the ground to take care of your robot, well, that's fine. But if you want a robot in your house, that's not too good. If I've got to sit there and tell my robot how to unload my dishwasher, it's not going to do me much good. I may as well unload the dishwasher myself. So that's why economically robots are unscalable, because they take too much human interaction. Either the human is controlling the robot or spending enormous amounts of effort writing computer code to tell the robot what to do. And that's why we're stuck in robotics right now. At least that's our thesis. So Brain Corporation wants to be a business that supplies brains for robots. So what's a brain for a robot mean? Well, at this juncture, a brain for a robot means a well-integrated piece of computer hardware and software that targets the needs of robotics, but which also includes the ability to train the robot and to have the robot explore its environment and adapt to its environment spontaneously. The things that we do so well as humans, which we mostly associate with the capabilities of our brain. And that's how the overlap comes here with the BRAIN initiative. So that's a little bit about Brain Corporation and what we're up to. So I thought I'd say now about why now? Why Why do we want to build brains for robots now? Why do we want to make intelligent machines now? Why now? I think there's a host of reasons why now. One of the reasons is that over the past several decades, we've developed these enormous computer and information technologies, and we've created a flood of information, literally drowning in information. But we really don't have the capacity to sift through all that information and figure out what's important. And to the degree we do, it's very narrow or very specialized or very, very expensive still. So we have this flood. So we have a need that we've created. We didn't have much need for brains a while ago because we didn't have that much information. Now we've got a ton. I think another reason we need smart machines now more than we ever have is that our lives are becoming longer, and we expect higher standards of living. And I actually think if we don't get some smart machines to help take care of ourselves, we're going to have all our young people taking care of all of our old people, and nobody else is going to be doing anything. So I really think we need to be able to automate some of the daily tasks of our lives, and again, bring the costs down so that we can all live longer and independently. I think also there will be, once we can build intelligent machines, dramatic increases in, for example, energy efficiency and many other aspects of life. I mean, most machines are stupid. They just don't do anything unless you tell them what to do, and for that reason they sit there and do stuff that doesn't need to be done, and they waste a lot of energy. We don't really have a good sense for how to do that, because a smart machine would have to know what's going on in the environment around it, not just simply respond to some stupid program that somebody's written for some very narrow set of things it's supposed to do. But that's what we have now. And I think finally, and not least important, is that in the national security arena, and some of you may have remembered that I came from DARPA before I came to Brain Corporation, the threats that we face are complicated and difficult, and they're like finding a needle in a haystack all of the time, right? The problem is that the needles that exist now can be extraordinarily damaging, and if you don't find them. So the threats from, say, for example, cyber attacks are attacks that a relatively small group of people can bring together and bring down an entire infrastructure of a country. And they're extraordinarily difficult to find, because if you looked at the sea of information on the internet and tried to find out who's doing what and where the bad things are, nobody knows how to do that. I think we're almost defenseless in that way. And there are others too. For example, with the recent bombings at the Boston Marathon, it was remarkable. You may have noticed all of the video that was there, because all these people have all these smart devices, right? But it still took a team of humans to look at all those videos and sort through and find out who the bad guys were. We're not close to being able to do that sort of thing yet. So again, I think that's why sort of the time is now on sort of what's driving us, why we need it. So I'd like to say a little bit about what's driving us from the opposite side, about the sort of the threat of not doing it. And I think this is particularly pertinent in California. It has to do, in my opinion, with the maturation of computing technology and the industries associated with it. We are rapidly coming to the end of what people call Moore's Law, or scaling in semiconductors. And this sort of exponential growth in computing capacity we've had for the past several decades is going to end. And that brings with it a host of economic challenges for the companies that do it, for example, as well as for California, where much of that industry is based. So the point there is that an intelligent technology, I think, will grow out of that industry. And this is where the BRAIN initiative can help, because there are fundamental things that we don't know how to do, and I'll come back to that in a moment. So I think basically there's a threat there, and on the flip side, the opportunity is if you were to try to simulate, make a human scale model of a brain today, you would need something like 20 gigawatts of power by many estimates, some absurd amount of power, right? You just can't do it with current computing technology. On the flip side, the brain uses 20 watts, so you can see there's this massive, massive possible increase in our capability to do things once we know what we're doing. So the way I like to think of it now, where are we now from a technology perspective? I like to say that we built machines before there were Newton's laws, and we did chemistry before there was a periodic table in quantum mechanics, but we did it a whole lot better after we understood those things. So today we're essentially in the pre-Newtonian era of intelligent machines. We're building intelligent machines, but we really don't know what we're doing. Okay? We're putting them together in pieces, we're hacking them together, we're making, we're sort of cramming them together in some ways that we don't understand to get them to do the few things we need them to do, but we don't have a map of what it is we need to do. There are basic things we don't understand. And this is why the BRAIN Initiative is so important for this technological future that I'm describing. I mean, and I don't know, I think, once we get over this hurdle, which I'm hoping the BRAIN Initiative will help us get there, I don't know what the future will look like, but I will give you an analogy just so you can sort of get some perspective on it. It was roughly, I think, 70 years ago that we discovered the transistor. Now look where we are 70 years later. What's the world going to look like after we understand what intelligence is and how to build intelligent systems? I think it will be astonishingly transformative to human history. So a few things about California. Why California, I think, is the right, best, maybe only place to do this, and a few things about how I think the state could help. First of all, there are a number of labs in California now working in the field of neuromorphic computing. This is the field that I worked in at DARPA. Neuromorphic computing you could think of as computer architecture inspired by the brain. So they tend to have things that look like neurons in them and things that look like synapses in them and make lots of connections between those neurons and synapses with some means of regulating what's going on the way we think a brain does. They're not a brain yet. They're a special kind of computer that's inspired by the brain. So within the last several years, a number of companies have been working on these, some of whom I know personally because they worked on my projects at DARPA. But they include IBM, HRL Laboratories in Malibu, HP Laboratories in Palo Alto, and Qualcomm in San Diego. And I don't know what's going on at other large companies like Intel and Google because they won't tell me, but I would not be surprised if they don't also have efforts that overlap some of these interests. So a lot of these companies are driven by this fear that I mentioned about the end of scaling and Moore's law and the maturation of the computing technologies, and they're looking for the next big thing. Also, there are, within California, the field of neuromorphic computing essentially grew out of Carver-Mead and Caltech some 20 or so years ago, and there are still many leading academic experts in the area, for example, at Stanford and here at UCSD and elsewhere in the state. And now there are some small companies like Brain Corporation who are emerging trying to say, can we build businesses in this space? And so if you were to come to Brain Corporation today, you would see us doing sort of two different kinds of things. On sort of the research side, and we're basically a bunch of researchers. Oh, and by the way, so Brain Corporation is this odd mixture of neuroscientists, computer scientists, roboticists, electrical engineers, mechanical engineers, and now we have marketing people. So it's a very interesting and dynamic organization. But if you came in and you looked at it, you say, what are we doing every day, right? Well, on the research sides of things, we're building large-scale neural models on computers. We recently finished a project where we did a large-scale model of the mammalian visual cortex. And key things about this model is most of the structure in the model emerges as the model experiences a visual scene that it sees, and it also learns to track objects that it's primed with spontaneously. And it's far from being everything that you would like a visual cortex to be, but it's still quite an accomplishment, and I think you would also see we put a lot of effort into taking those models and putting them in the real world. So either on robots, which we're doing now, or in virtual environments of some kind, virtual worlds, and having them do things. So that's sort of on the research side of things. Now, on the more practical side of things, you would see us building robots and sticking little computers on them and sticking various brain models on them or machine learning techniques and training robots to do things in our laboratory. Currently relatively simple things, but still things that are pretty cool. You drive a robot around and suddenly it figures out what it is you want it to do and it starts driving itself around. So we're trying to merge this, this research piece, which is fundamental, which is why we need the BRAIN Initiative, with a practical piece which says there's a technology and a business and money to be made. And I think that's what needs to be done. You need to work both ends of the spectrum because the goal is you want to close the gap in the middle. But if you're not working it from both ends, that I mean from the practical business economic perspective and from the research perspective, when you close it, there will be no way to leverage it. In other words, we figure out how the brain works, let's just say, okay? When that happens, I hope Brain Corporation, obviously, but somebody can take that information and rapidly turn it into something that's extraordinarily valuable. So on that sort of more practically focused, near-term economically driven ideas, I think there are opportunities where the state can help. So for example, Brain Corporation and Qualcomm and many of the people here at UCSD, including Ramesh, whom I see sitting in the audience here, and the Chancellor, have talked about creating a robotics hub in the San Diego area that might consist of an institute. And this is me speaking, I'm not speaking for, let me qualify this by saying this is a vision and not a reality. But a robotics hub in San Diego, which might consist of an institute within UCSD, a robotics-focused incubator in the area, perhaps also at UCSD, and basically a shared kind of lab space within UCSD that people who do robotics inside and hopefully outside the university could come and access. And I think the point here, or the opportunity here, is that, first of all, nothing like this currently exists because the field of robotics is this massively fragmented and relatively small industry, but one that is slowly coming along. So in this area, in San Diego, first of all, you have a great university. You have leadership in the BRAIN Initiative. You have a number of defense industries who are the leaders in autonomous drones. You have a variety of small companies now emerging in robotics. You have across the border, in Mexico, some very cheap manufacturing if you want to build cheap consumer robots, which is what we want to do. So I think there's big opportunity there for some leadership from the state. And I would also say that, I really do appreciate the interest of the political leadership, and I'll tell you why, from my own experience at DARPA. So when I was at DARPA, I was pursuing many ideas related to the ones that I've just talked about as a program manager. But I felt like a man alone in the wilderness. There was literally no political cover for anything that I was trying to do. There just wasn't the realization yet that the potential was there. And without that, what happens is, since DARPA, for example, gets its money from Congress, if Congress doesn't feel that it understands what's going on, it doesn't approve the programs, and then DARPA gets very conservative about where it invests its money. And I think so I experienced that firsthand for the whole time I was there. So I'm very glad that situation may be changing. And I think also, as maybe Ralph said, it's really important for these really grand initiatives to have political leadership. And the reason for that is that, the people working down in the agencies or at the research level or anywhere, if they don't have that sort of leadership, they get very conservative about what they're doing. And you won't hit the home runs. And so that's another big kudos to the people who got the BRAIN Initiative going there. So that's what I have.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hilton. Ms. Medeiros.
Thank you. And thank you, Senator, for convening this very important and enlightening session and for inviting me to participate. I'm Gail Medeiros, President and CEO of BayBio. BayBio is a nonprofit organization that supports the life science industry in Northern California. Before I was at BayBio, I had a very rewarding corporate career in the biotech industry until multiple sclerosis that at times robs me of my sight and my ability to walk, sidelined me from a corporate career. MS affects 2.3 million patients worldwide and is one of the neurodegenerative diseases that might be impacted with better treatments by the BRAIN Initiative. So I'm very happy to be here today. The BRAIN Initiative holds very, very large potential. It's the first large government effort focused on basic research that can lay the foundation for addressing some of the largest unmet medical needs in the U.S., including Alzheimer's, ALS, autism, mental illnesses. And the California research centers can play a very leading role in this project. 6 of the 15 advisory members on the BRAIN initiative come from California institutions, including one of the co-chairs. In addition to the academic centers, UCSF, UCSD, Stanford, California Institute of Technology, and government centers like the Lawrence Berkeley Labs, there are a number of private research institutions in our state, including the Salk, the J. David Gladstone Institute of Neurology, and the Buck Institute of Aging, that are at the forefront of brain disease research, CNS, and neurodegenerative disease research. So we can contribute a lot to the program, to the BRAIN initiative, and long term we stand to benefit tremendously in our state. This, if done well, can be an economic driver for economic development for the high-tech robotic fields and biotech companies with a myriad of devices, drug treatments, imaging, large data applications. So this can have tremendous business impact. But perhaps most importantly, over the long term, this can lead to improved and lower cost health care for Californians. Diseases of the brain are some of the most costly long-term chronic diseases in our healthcare system because most of these are treated with very intensive caregiving efforts. And so this has potential to really be of tremendous value to our state. How do we maximize the value, the impact and value of this initiative? Well, we do need to start with the basic research tools and the basic research that's been described by the first panelists, cell census, brain mapping, imaging, recording tools, data systems, models. But that's just the starting point. Basic research needs to be translated by translational medicine into applications. And I encourage the project to think about the practical applications and in looking at ways to create tools that will encourage public and industry picking up the basic research and moving it forward into practical applications. Some of those things are better animal models of disease, how to select homogeneous patient populations for clinical trials, and improve clinical measures. Before the federal government shut down this week, they just this week, the CMS rejected beta amyloid PET scans as useful tools in diagnosis of disease because of just insufficient utility. So we're going backwards in terms of being able to apply this, and we need better tools. I also believe that if the BRAIN initiative is able to look at etiology of disease, things like the impact of the immune system on the brain, that the insights that we see within one disease may be very useful and applicable to a broad range of disease. So I encourage that linking this to the etiology of some of the common neurodegenerative disorders. Once we look at basic research moving into translational medicine, we need funds to be able to develop the treatments. Basic research is a necessary starting point, but it's insufficient. And in order to get treatments to patients, industry plays a critical role. Dr. Chun in the first panel drew some highlights of this to the Genome Project. And I think the concept of it takes a lot of time, a lot of effort, and a lot of work to be able to go from the basic understanding to treatments is very applicable to thinking about the BRAIN initiative. But we live in a very different era now. In the genome era, investors were willing to fund promises. So we saw hundreds of millions of dollars going into very, very early stage companies to be able to take that basic work and work it all the way through to treatments. Those days are long gone. We have a tremendous crisis right now in funding of innovation. In the last 2 years, VC funding has dropped by about 30%, and it's even worse when you look at the funding of high-risk or early-stage projects, and anything coming out of the brain and neurology in general is classed in that high-risk category. But that's the tip of the iceberg, because for every $3 that's being invested over the last 2 years, only $1 is being replenished in venture capital companies. So we're seeing a dramatic decrease in the amount of funding that's going into innovation. And that brings me to what can the state and local governments do to make sure that we really benefit in California from this wonderful BRAIN initiative. I encourage the state to think about tax incentives for investment in early stage research. Also, I believe that we should do everything we can to exempt grant and research funding from taxation. Right now in the city of San Francisco, if the Michael J. Fox Foundation for Parkinson's or the National Multiple Sclerosis Society provides a grant, a research grant to an early stage company, the city of San Francisco taxes that grant funding. That is going the wrong direction if what we're trying to do here is to encourage these treatments. CalPERS has dramatically decreased the amount of funding that they're putting into venture firms. I encourage the state to consider restoring at least 1% of CalPERS funding going into life science funds. And lastly, the state enacted AB 93 in July, which for the first time provided some incentives to have commercial bioscience companies locate in the state. But we're a long ways from commercial products with the BRAIN initiative, probably decades. Let's expand AB 93 so that as ideas come out of the BRAIN initiative, we put investments into companies that start off of that research and encourage them to locate in California rather than going elsewhere. There's no doubt that the BRAIN initiative is going to be a very valuable opportunity for California. Immediately, it will provide funding to our academic and private research institutions. But there's much more opportunity if we can take that basic research and provide the incentives and encouragement through public-private partnerships to move it into translation, and then provide state policies that encourage investment in early research to make this drive economic development in the high-tech industry and the biotech industry, and ultimately that will benefit the health and the healthcare costs for Californians.
Thank you very much, Ms. Medeiros. So I wanted to give some kudos to Bay Bio and Biocom and the California Biotechnology Foundation. I think a lot of people don't think about this, but the work that you do is extremely important. I, as a legislator, have a particular interest in biotechnology because of the community that I represent, but your organization and the others that I've mentioned really build a very important bridge that the legislature has no other bridge to cross, but the bridge that you build. For example, Bay Bio just recently held a reception and a tour in San Francisco where legislators had the opportunity to walk into labs and meet with people and talk about the innovation, and then spend a little time talking afterwards with excited inventors, which is always great. But that doesn't naturally happen. So I just wanted to point out the importance of organizations like yours and Biocom in allowing the opportunity for members who either have an interest or maybe haven't developed one yet, have the ability to sort of see what's going on and then get excited and interested. And that, of course, impacts and influences the work that they do, like a AB 93 or something like that. So I just wanted to point that out, and I think we need to do more of that. And the point I made earlier, Obviously, we can't have all the scientists working in the legislature and all the legislators working in science. That probably wouldn't work very well, by the way. But to have the opportunity for people to see what each other does and allow the opportunity for, just like you talked about, putting people in the same room so they can discuss things and understand. We need to do more of that, and what you are doing is very, very helpful, and that's how we get members excited and interested in these kinds of issues. So I just wanted to mention that. So along those same lines, we've been talking about how the state can help, but what sort of ideas might you have to allow for more interface with legislators to help them understand so that they can be more and more interested in working with you and understanding what you're doing on a day-to-day basis?
Well, one of the kinds of activities that we have started doing as part of our center is to hold various kinds of workshops and gatherings, some of which are for the scientists to get them started, some of which are going to be aimed at the public, and just as easily could be set up for legislators, in which we would have a team of scientists vetted ahead of time for those who are better able to speak to a lay audience, which is not a universal trait among scientists.
We have the same problem.
But there are some who are quite good at it, and so this is the kind of thing that we are in a very good position to do, and it is completely in line with our activities that we have on board.
Any other thoughts and ideas?
Well, if you would give me a list of who's interested, I'd be happy to talk to them or show them around or whatever. It's a new thought for me. So
we have to get them interested
okay,
too.
to get
so
them
that
interested
they want
first.
To talk to you. So that's sort of what I'm talking about. For example, I've been working in the biotech area for a while, having chaired this select committee and a previous one on biotechnology. So I have an interest. But for me, it was exciting the other day at this reception, for example, to see another member walk into a lab and start to get excited about this field. So that's what I'm talking about also, not just me telling you which members are interested, but doing what we can to get more members interested in pursuing information about this field. Because there's a lot of competition, by the way, for people trying to get our interest.
So one of the things that we do is we invite legislators out to tour our companies and the incubators. And there's nothing like actually watching, walking through a lab and actually seeing things in action. And I think the robotics is, even in the drug discovery process, one of the things that's coolest is the robotics. So I'm sure that your company would be a great place to tour. So we do that. We'd like to do more of that. The other thing I want to mention, which I think is a tremendous opportunity, not brain specific, but in terms of encouraging understanding of this whole industry, is next year in June, the International Bio Convention will be coming to San Diego. There will be about 15,000 people from around the world focusing on biotechnology. It may be possible to put a panel or a symposium together specifically around the brain, but it would be a fabulous opportunity for legislators in the state of California to see what is going on, not just in California, but around the world in this area. And there's a lot of educational sessions, and perhaps we could organize a select committee hearing to coincide with that convention.
That'd be a great idea. I say yes.
No.
So, yes.
Oh, sorry. I just wanted to add to that. I think that's exactly a great idea. I mean, I think having panel discussions and of this type at larger scientific meetings. I mean, these are big meetings that occur, weekly at the Moscone Center in San Francisco, for example, would go really a long way. Not just for educating the assembly members or what have you, but also for really scientists need to realize that they need to take a bigger picture look at what they do, and they need to be able to effectively articulate their message, or it's not always so useful. And I think that also would come out of these types of interactions.
Great. Thank you very much. So Another question would be, we're looking to the future, looking at the sorts of projects that we are imagining with the MIND initiative. Do we believe that our current system of education can provide what's needed for the training for these future scientists and engineers? It's kind of a tough question to answer, I know.
Well, it is.
What should we do about it? I mean, California, obviously, we have one of the reasons this is happening in California is because we have such fine institutions, private, public, state institutions, and we must be always mindful of making sure we give the support to those institutions so they can continue to do what they do best. So what are your thoughts on how we make sure we are doing what we need to do to keep up with this future innovation and train students for the future?
This has been an important topic of conversation around here as well, and something that we believe can be a stepwise process starting at the more advanced levels, where at the outset we will be sponsoring fellowships for graduate students and postdoctoral fellows to work in these hybrid teams across disciplines to receive that kind of direct training, research experience in the multiple disciplines. But we also have ideas for how to take this down to the undergraduate level as a way of being able to infuse science more integrally into the rest of the curriculum. So instead of having a course that would be just science versus just English or something of that sort, most novels deal with consciousness and feelings and thoughts and memories. So we are beginning to discuss how we can integrate these things in a way that will make science more accessible to everyone and have many more people brought along to be able to begin to think in those terms. And as I have always heard it said, it is the colleges that set the goalposts for what the secondary schools will offer. So this is a stepwise process that works its way gradually downward. And this is something that we have actually already begun to try to think about how we could do.
All right, thank you very much.
I'd like to put one pitch that working downward is good, but we need to also work upwards. What we're finding is that by 8th grade, we see, because of the focus on the standardized tests and a lot of schools not having science curriculums, by the time that students are in the 8th grade, they're dropping out of science. And it's almost impossible, if they don't have a strong STEM foundation, to jump into an undergraduate degree in science if they haven't had the basics. So we applaud the state for setting science standards. Last year, we'd like to see more investment in STEM education. I know as an industry executive, when in my last company, over half our scientists were on green cards, on visas. We need to home grow our scientists, and I'd like to encourage the state to do everything that it can to build STEM and emphasize STEM in its curriculum, because it doesn't matter whether someone's going into robotics or computers or neurobiology. You have to have that STEM education, and we really need to grow our own there. And I see the state starting to make strides there with the science standards, but we need to continue investment and make sure that we're giving our own Californian students a chance at higher education careers by having the fundamental base that they require.
Yes, thank you. I couldn't agree with you more. And I'll make one closing comment on that, and we could talk about this forever, but we do have to go on to the next panel. I think something that Dr. Greenspan said really hit me. Obviously, it's very important to build that structure and the STEM programs for our young students, but also make it accessible so students see themselves as scientists, and that's what they're, that they be inspired to move on into these roles. Because I think a lot of students, even with STEM, don't see themselves as future scientists for one reason or another. And I think that that's another very important part of what we do. So thank you all very much. Let's give a round of applause to this panel. Our next panel will be speaking about facilitating success and the role of state government, which of course we have delved into a little bit already, but we will do a little further discussion on that. So I'd like to introduce the panelists. Dr. Ramesh Rao is the director of the Qualcomm Institute, the UCSD division of the California Institute for Telecommunications and Information Technology, or CAL-IT2. He is the Qualcomm Endowed Chair in Telecommunications and Information Technologies in the Jacobs School of Engineering here at UCSD, and is also a founding member of the UCSD for Brain Activity Mapping. As director of the Qualcomm Institute, Dr. Rao leads several major interdisciplinary and collaborative projects and has been a principal investigator on dozens of federal, state, foundation, and industry-funded grants. Dr. Rao has twice been elected to the IEEE on the Institute of the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers, Information Theory Society's Board of Governors, and publications editor for IEEE Transactions on Information Theory. Dr. Carol Mimura is the Assistant Vice Chancellor for Intellectual Property and Industry Research Alliances at the University of California at Berkeley. She is a member of the Forum on Drug Discovery, Development, and Translation of the Institute of Medicine of the National Academies of Science. And she has served on the boards of directors for Children's Hospital Research Institute in Oakland and BayBio, as well as the executive director of UC Berkeley's Office of Technology Licensing. She has received a Deal of Distinction Award from the Licensing Executive Society, the inaugural Patents for Humanity Award from the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, the President's Cup, and the President's Cup from Yale University, just to name a few of her accomplishments. Dr. Adriana Tahonar, did I have that right? Sorry. Tahonar is the Entrepreneur Program Manager for the QB3 Startup and QB3 Accelerator programs. This program is aimed at helping entrepreneurs from well-structured companies with the help of leading law firms in the Bay Area. In 2 years, this program has helped form over 150 companies, 31 of which are already operational. Dr. Tehanar received her PhD in Biological and Biomedical Sciences from Harvard University and holds a BS from MIT. And our next panelist, Dr. Robert Kahn, is the president of the Kavli Foundation and Zabel Professor and Dean Emeritus of the Jacobs School of Engineering here at UC San Diego and the Walter J. Zabel Professor of Engineering Science. He has helped establish the California Institute of Telecommunications and Information Technology program, through which he has built partnerships between the university and industry. He is a member of the National Academy of Engineering and fellow of both the American Physical Society and the American Nuclear Society. Let me welcome you all and thank you all for being here today. Please begin the discussion.
So I had some prepared remarks, and happy to respond to any questions you might have, of course.
Thank you,
So it's an honor to be asked to share our experiences from having been part of the what's now called the Governor Gray Davis Institute for Science and Innovation. There's 4 of them, and we house the CAL-IT2 one here. Permit me to sort of recount how I remember the genesis of these institutes. As I understand it, Dr. Richard Lerner, who was the president at the time of the Scripps Research Institute, came up with the idea in his mind. It was interesting that he did not think of something that would provide resources, more resources for TSRI. Instead, he approached a UC regent, John Morse at the time, Lynn Schenck, Governor Gray Davis, Dick Atkinson at the University of California, with this idea of creating and placing these institutes, each of which would receive substantial state contributions of $100 million each, inside a UC. So the consensus from the very beginning that was built to create this involved not just the UC making a case for itself, but for other entities making that case based on their sense of where it was likely to bear fruit. 13 years into the program, we have benefited enormously. I was just counting for myself. We've had 3 UC presidents, 3 UC provosts, 3 governors, 3 UCSD chancellors, and 3 engineering deans here at UCSD. And every single one of them, even though sometimes they came from different parties, saw the value of the state's investment in these institutes for science and innovation. That broad-based support that is robust against all of these changes, I think, has served us enormously. It is good to have many founding fathers and mothers, we have discovered. They all genuinely want to help, not only when they're in office, but even when they're out of office. We'll forever remember Bob Kahn as the Dean of Engineering here, who put into play every single connection he had to help spin up what I think is one of the most spectacular one of these institutes. And we get to turn to them for help when we run into unexpected hurdles, of which there will be plenty. So the whole undertaking was quite bodacious. Some of this is known, but I thought it'd be worth sharing with you. We had to write a proposal and compete for these monies, and we won sort of an astonishing amount of money, $100 million of capital monies. And now I will make my first digression. The original plan was to provide us this funding straight from the state. But within a year of the establishment of this program, the internet bubble burst. And so funding had to be moved onto lease revenue bonds, through which we inherited a whole bunch of constraints that limited our ability to partner with industry. And only now, 13 years later, have we been able to address that in a satisfactory way with the support of everybody on campus and at the Office of the President. So we can now once again innovate in how we form relationships with industry partners. $100 million was a lot of money, but it also came with this equally amazing requirement, which the 2 chancellors, in our case, San Diego and Irvine chancellors, signed up to, which is that they would be responsible for raising $200 million, right? 2-for-1 matching. That was a bare minimum that the state demanded of us. And this had to take place during the first 4 years of the project, which, by the way, was how long it was going to take to build the facility. So you had to go out and raise the funds while you didn't have the facility. That was going to be the reason why you're going to, you know, get the support.
We knew you could do it.
That actually is the bottom line. I was trying to warm up to it. So that gave us, you know, there's no way out. Gave us the courage to knock on every corporate door and enlist the support of everybody, and Bob was driving this. We connected not only with everybody on campus, but everybody off campus. We started with the telecommunications cluster, but miraculously, it seems the federal agencies, NSF and NIH, were poised at the time to incorporate information technology in a big way into new programs. There was this ITR program. A quarter of every one of the $2 billion expended out of NSF was spent on this campus. There's an enormous amount of activity that we could participate in because we had bet on information technology as a transformational tool. We enlisted partners, some of like Qualcomm, you know, that provided enormous amount of philanthropic support. Irwin Jacobs was right up there on stage when the original program was announced, down to startups that had nothing to offer other than, you know, volunteer time. So there's a big coalition of the willing, and it continues to be. For the most part, we operated out of construction trailers. And I'm not trying to be over-dramatic here, but you could hear the skunks and other critters crawling not only under the floor, but in the walls at night. So it was sort of a pioneering spirit. You know, you knew you were doing it because you were passionate about it. You weren't doing it because you knew exactly what this was going to do for you. And to our amazement, when we went through our 5-year review, we found that we had exceeded. You know, Bob Dines, who was our chancellor at the time, and Dick Atkinson, who was president, who was both with us now. They said they did not think we would meet this 2-for-1 matching, right? So the goals of the program were never meant to be modest. We were calling on technologists to produce societal transformations. What do they know about societal transformations, right? But we also had extraordinary new technical infrastructure that allowed you to sort of venture forth where you'd never been before. The state commitment was just extraordinary, but the demands they were making seemed impossible. It was actually quite an insane undertaking. And the insanity of it is what makes it possible for you to reach deep into all the things that you think you could just pull off if you give it a shot. And the only way out was up. And so this virtuous upward cycle is what it all created. And I think we can do it again. Looking a little bit inwards, while we speak of societal transformation and creating regional clusters, there is a significant task, at least back then, of cultural transformation within our campuses. We do like to build silos. We do like to build our own labs. And there's many things in academia that reinforce that. And we knew from the very beginning that that was one of the things we had to change. We couldn't talk about interdisciplinarity and working in the community if we couldn't do that amongst ourselves. And I think a key part of it was administrative autonomy within the university, but the autonomy to create a different culture within this entity. And what that meant was being able to create shared use labs. So we hold the line. Every lab in our facility is open to everybody in the country for a fee, right? Fee for service is not part of our prevailing culture. We expect things to be there for free. The ability to hire a pool of highly skilled technical professionals, but pooled, so they're not working for one professor, they're working for the entity as a whole, and they're available for a variety of projects. Available to work as people who build elaborate systems, people who work as project managers on complex projects, and serve as mentors, not only to faculty, but also to students. We could not do that if we didn't have administrative autonomy. We just wouldn't be able to hire such people. In hindsight, it seems like these are simple enough building blocks, but Ralph, as he spins up the activity that we have in mind here at UCSD, will need every tool we can extend. And we are delighted that Cal IT2, Qualcomm Institute, is so much a part of spinning up the BRAIN initiative. Look forward to working with him, transferring every bit of insight that we have learned to make sure that this flourishes too. So what we enjoy here is administrative autonomy coupled with financial and programmatic accountability. That combination works very well for us. We've leveraged state commitments into our institute about 7-fold, and we're happy with that. You know, it only pays for 14 cents on the dollar. We can grow and shrink as needed, and that makes a big difference. I wanted to also draw attention to something which is sort of like the unplanned thing. Sometimes I think we are the center for unexpected encounters. And I think that's an important part when you undertake a journey into the unknown, like I understand the BRAIN initiative is focused to be. It's not about accelerating known pathways, but by doing whole new things. We don't yet have the thing that will help us understand how the brain works better. So we have to create these encounters amongst faculty from diverse disciplines who are ready for sort of this adventure, encounters amongst students working on different projects, but who discover while they're doing that they have a shared passion for doing something new, you know, build that consumer robot that Todd was talking about, that will walk the dog and the dog will walk the robot and bring it back home, you know, I mean, some crazy idea that'll get turned on. We have learned to create encounters amongst community members and faculty who rally around new emergent ways of using technology to engage the public, like election monitoring, strange new ways in which you can use ubiquitous technologies to enhance governance, and encounters that create new pathways for our students. Ultimately, a university is about its students. And it's our students that will carry forth the knowledge that they've gathered, the sense of curiosity that hopefully we have nurtured into society. They're often invisible in the design of these large-scale programs, at least in the early stages, but I think that is really the big payoff. And so I liked your question earlier on about how does this engage the educational program, because if we don't have majors, if we don't have programs that will train the students to work on the BRAIN, for example, initiative, then, you know, it'll just be researchers chasing after a few postdocs that know how to do this interdisciplinary work. We have to create that workforce. So I think starting early, thinking about the undergraduate experience, I think will pay off. I just keep reminding myself that, you know, students spend 4 years in college and then about 50 years working. That's a huge leveraging there, right? So if those 4 years can influence what they go on to do for the rest of their lives, you know, no better payoff. We have some numbers to share with you. You probably heard these kinds of numbers. One of the things we get called upon is to produce voluminous reports and metrics about everything imaginable. And we wonder, does anybody read them?
Some of us do.
But there are occasionally times like this when we are happy to see what the numbers say themselves. So the $100 million state commitment, I think, cumulatively has produced, in round numbers, about $850 million of non-state directly funded research activity, just counting grants and gifts and so on. And we're using very conservative ways of accounting, not double counting other activities. 32 startups that licensed intellectual property disclosed directly by researchers working in our institutes. 330 industry partners that we have engaged with, some in big ways, some modest ways. 274 inventions, about 30 patents that have finally been issued. Even though formally we are a research enterprise, we make it our business to engage with undergraduates through research experiences, you know, to complement their educational experience, which is in the hands of the academic units. And about 1,000 undergraduates have been involved with us. You also had a question about what might be suggestions that you wanted from us to help socialize this in political circles, perhaps. Just a few days ago, I was at the CCST, the California Council for Science and Technology meeting that we had. And you know, there are these, there's this program called CCST Fellows that plays PhD level folks in the offices of various senators and congressmen.
Yes.
And many of them end up playing a significant role in drafting the bills and the language. And I thought that was one of the sort of unique aspects of California government benefits from real, solid, well-trained technology expertise. So,
Absolutely. It's one of the best things we've done recently. Thank you very much. Thank you. Glad to hear the investment's paying off. Thank you, Dr. Rao. Dr. Mimura.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your leadership in convening this committee. And I'm very delighted and honored to have been invited to participate. I'm so glad to see the UCSD campus firsthand and all of the wonderful infrastructure that you have here that was truly the result of organized collaborative innovation. I mean, the whole plateau was grown up through through the Connect program and other initiatives that really brought all of the stakeholders together. It's quite impressive. And it's really something I think that has been emulated elsewhere. It happened after the Bay Area, you know, formed around the investments that started Silicon Valley and then the biotech industry. Had we had such a focused, coordinated effort, you know, where would we be now, I think is the question. So congratulations. So I'm here today to be talking about translating research outcomes for social benefit and economic impact. And I always like to start by saying that great research universities have always served the tripartite mission of teaching, research, and public service. And we continue to do that, but increasingly we employ new tools and we do this in new ways. For example, there's a heightened awareness now of where we sit in the innovation enterprise research ecosystem and what we can do as universities to accelerate the pace of innovation, and how universities can be both relevant and better connected to our local innovation systems, two of which in the Bay Area are major drivers of economic impact in the state of California, the information and communication technologies industries and the biotech, plus the new entrants in the green tech / clean tech field. And as land-grant universities, including UC Berkeley, we were always tasked since our inception with promoting the useful arts, which in 1868 meant helping the agricultural arts and the mechanical arts, but there are modern-day components of that. And we are tasked increasingly with spurring economic development locally, regionally, and nationally. So I took my charge today to be to answer two questions, to describe some models of public-private partnerships for translating research out of the laboratory and into use for society, because after all, the taxpayers pay for basic research. And also make recommendations on what the state can do to optimize its role in developing research results with economic and scientific impact, specifically under the BRAIN Initiative. But in 8 short minutes, I thought I could only summarize a few key points, including what are some of the features of successful public-private partnerships, and describe some examples of these, as well as product development partnerships, or PDPs, and some lessons learned, and finally give some recommendations on how the state can maximize some of the resources that will be made available under the BRAIN Initiative. Well, successful public-private partnerships have been devised to deliver solutions across many sectors at UC Berkeley, and we've been involved in dozens of these in the fields of diagnostics, agricultural biotechnology, therapeutics, biofuels, global health, sanitation, education, computation, transportation, and more. Berkeley has research contracts with over 520 companies who sponsor research at Berkeley. This is an 8-fold increase of where we were when we started the Office of Intellectual Property and Industry Research Alliances 10 years ago. We have $85 million in industry-sponsored expenditures at Berkeley, which is 12.3% of our total extramural funding for basic research at Berkeley, and it's second only to MIT's $103 million. If we have them squarely in our sights, we hope someday to overtake them. But industry, university, and and Berkeley is home to the Energy Biosciences Institute, a huge $500 million, 10-year public-private partnership that to date has funded many scores of projects and has trained over 300 students. In its first 5 years of existence, this partnership, a 4-way partnership between UC Berkeley, the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, the Lawrence Berkeley Lab, and it's funded by BP, has produced scores of patent applications, one of which has finally issued as a patent. BP has licensed that patent, and many more patents will issue in the coming months. But that's only one metric, because importantly, this 4-way partnership is government, university, industry working together on the shoulders of decades of prior state and federal funding to produce the labs that attracted BP to our campus. But this model represents a way to illustrate how you can have sustained long-term funding between and among sectors to explore the commercial potential of your discovery science, what you can do with basic research results. We are actually co-locating BP engineers on campus under a lease, which is very rare. It was a precedent at UC Berkeley because we have so little space for our own researchers, but it was a way to just quickly throw things over the fence to see if something works and to try to compress the vector, from basic research to translational research, and to catalyze commercial uptake, to catalyze and expedite commercial uptake and investment, of course. And so many of these models are models that are transacted with one particular agreement or another, but we're very interested in how to be more relevant to the private sector and what those places should look like where translational research occurs, because we can't do it all. At universities, we are very demonstrably on the basic research side. And we, as has been alluded to in other panels, there is a tremendous valley of death between discovery and translation. Also, the Energy Bio Institute is an embodiment of one aspect of what is known as open innovation, a particular field of inquiry that asks, how can we innovate together, and acknowledges that no one institution has all of the experts. So in BP's case, they were saying, we don't employ all of the relevant experts in this field, and in that case, BP had 100,000 employees, but they had only 3 biologists. So since they were interested in learning how to create biofuels, they realized that they should be partnering with a research institution, or a university that has biology, chemistry, physics, all of the hard sciences, plus the other elements such as law, public policy, land use, and all of the other things that they need to study around the area of biofuels. Also, they had, in the area of open innovation, they had a view that you don't have to cause innovation to happen from a top-down, in a top-down manner. If you give smart scientists the money, you can sit back and be impressed by what they produce. If you have all 11 BP vice presidents in a room and they say, we'll give you the money as long as you do this or that, then there will be nothing new. Whereas if you give an institution the money and you let them ask their experts what should be done, you get something very different. And we've been involved in also the Helen Wills Neuroscience Institute is at UC Berkeley, and it's also a partner in the Alzheimer's Disease Neuroimaging Initiative, launched in 2003 by 3 federal agencies, pharmaceutical companies, and nonprofit organizations. ADNI coordinates the efforts of academic institutions and private corporations, and study subjects in this initiative have been recruited from over 50 sites across the US and Canada. But Berkeley's role is the coordinating center for the ADNI's brain scanning thrust for amyloid mapping, and is a primary data analysis lab. ADNI-funded research on Alzheimer's disease leverages decades of prior investment in science and engineering at Berkeley, and investment in neuroscience by the state will further leverage a foundation that's poised to create jobs and economic growth at the crossroads where data science meets biology. Prior investment, for example, in the Human Genome Project, as has been alluded to before, diversified California's biotechnology industry beyond just drug discovery into data mining and genome analysis sectors. And I don't think that that could necessarily have been predicted in advance. And advances in neurotechnology will also advance California's healthcare and education sectors, also its information and communication sectors as well. It will stimulate growth, in other words, across many sectors in California. Now, getting back to, I should also mention that Berkeley has forged nearly 20 industry affiliate programs. And industry affiliate programs are important because they bring scores of representatives from companies onto campus to see what's going on at a great research universities. They're coming to hear seminars and to see poster sessions and to hear what students and postdocs are working on, but while they're on campus, they also see other opportunities to help us to innovate, such as endow a chair or sponsor a graduate research program or do a one-on-one sponsored research agreement. The industry affiliates programs are not necessarily motivated by IP. IP is an ancillary consideration. It's more for industry to have an ear to the ground. It's information and relationships. You can see who's who, which students and postdocs they'd like to hire. They also hire professors as consultants, and we encourage consulting as a private sector activity and public service role. Getting back to the anatomy of successful public-private partnerships, each one has to address, who are the parties? Are they nonprofit, for-profit? What are their roles? What are the risks and benefits? How do you govern this partnership? What are the resources needed? Who owns what? The IP, the data, and so many other details. I've put them all in the footnotes, should you care to read about it. And also, successful partnerships in our experience include flexible and nuanced strategies to manage IP rights, and also new business models, such as the one that I described at the Energy Biosciences Institute, and good communication strategies, also a combination of both push and pull mechanisms. They also have creative and motivated negotiators who are willing to listen to the other side and craft whole cloth, not just to say, oh, you're here to sponsor research, here's this agreement, and by the way, it's not negotiable. But equally important to these elements, which we contract to in legally binding agreements, culture is also important in forging successful public-private partnerships and product development partnerships, because the deal structure is one thing, but having a collaboration minded mentality from the beginning, and doing things differently, such as real-time sharing of data. I mean, academics are not always trained to work in teams. It's often an every man for himself environment in working your way up the academic ladder because of the way promotion and tenure works. But when people are funded as groups to do something where collaboration is the be-all and end-all of the collaboration, sometimes they realize that real-time sharing of data can get all of them funded again. So they're changing their mentality to, if we all post our data online every night, and we have collaborators around the globe, someone will be solving my problem overnight, and I'll receive something in the morning, as opposed to thinking about these collaborators as their competitors for the next grant. So in the life cycle of innovation that includes discovery, translation, and deployment, and reinvestment, startup companies play incredibly critical roles. And there have been about 150 startup companies from Berkeley in a 5-year period from 2007 to 2012. They had raised $1.3 billion, and 65 of them had raised an average of $13.5 million. These companies take risks that, as new business hatcheries, that existing companies often will not bear. They are critical translators of discovery and harness the passion and drive of young people, including our graduate students and postdocs. And then they leverage many years of prior investment by the state and government. They're very lean and nimble, and they're capable of pivoting because they're small companies and they're very focused. However, it's becoming more and more difficult for them to obtain private capital, as we heard from Gail Medeiros. But startup companies need proof of concept and market validation funds. And since equity investment is very hard to get, we have to find another way of skewing the risk to reward ratio. So I think I'll skip over some of the other material and quickly get to my 7 recommendations. In the area of catalysis of commercial uptake, in the past, the state funded matching grant programs where if a private company would invest in corporate-sponsored research at the University of California, they would have their budget matched. And this resulted in a 3-fold increase, and this was in 1996 under Pete Wilson, of corporate-sponsored research, and it also resulted in a corresponding wave of increase of new inventions that were funded by industry. And I think we should bring back the proof of concept funding. It's often said by professors that, just when things were getting interesting, my federal grant ran out. So we can really help to span the gap if we bring that back. Also, multidisciplinary and cross-sector collaboration, simply as we've heard from everyone, facilitates breakthrough. With regard to the BRAIN initiative, we need to make direct investments in the K-12 STEM fields and undergraduate and graduate education at the nexus of neuroscience and physical sciences and engineering to attract and retain the next generation of people to work in the high-tech economy and who will invent new tools in neurotechnology, including interventions for mental illness, vision and hearing impairment, and other neurological conditions. Third, we should support a self-perpetuating cycle of innovation in California. We should continue to provide an enhanced state R&D tax credits to companies. In 1996, in addition to the state matching grant program known as Discovery, the R&D tax credit for companies investing in sponsored research and other forms of R&D had their R&D credit raised from 12 to 24%. And the combination of those two were critical drivers in interest on the part of industry in sponsoring research at the University of California. We should also support tax exemptions on the sale of qualified small business stock for founders and early stage investors in small businesses. Also, fourth, startup companies are tremendous innovation accelerators. We should support infrastructure for entrepreneurship training and the development and maintenance of networks of information and resources at local and regional levels to create great networks that connect small companies with mentors and management such as serial CEOs, CFOs, seed and angel investors, incubators and accelerators, real estate providers, legal and financial service providers, and talent for these startup companies. we should fund startups across the board, and California should create incentives for hybrid models of funding this discovery research inside of startup companies in the nonprofit sector, funds of funds and things like that. We should improve the way that California funds innovation, and because improving innovation in California requires solutions across agencies, we should create a high-level unit in the governor's office as a facilitator of California's innovation capacity. And we should make it a priority. We should prioritize initiatives that seek to redefine how pre-commercial and early-stage commercial efforts can be launched and grow. Sixth, in the area of drug development, patient advocacy groups and venture philanthropy by foundations are increasingly important. So we should analyze relevant successful venture philanthropy investments such as those made by the Michael J. Fox Foundation to streamline and optimize the ways that foundations fund projects with the highest potential to advance neuroscience wherever they are. And the partnership between Lawrence Berkeley Lab and the Berkeley campus, as has been mentioned before, is highly synergistic. We should analyze the intersection of state conflict of interest regulations and government funding agency-based conflict of interest rules to determine if they're being interpreted too stringently or construed inconsistently across agencies. It's possible that the conflict of interest rules or guidelines need to be updated in view of some of these new models for funding translational research and increase the investment in the infrastructure. And my last two, we should attract the very best talent to California to work on these initiatives and more. So we need to consider how to make a faculty position at every UC campus as attractive as possible. And finally, in the same vein, we should streamline and exchange the high-tech and biotech, the exchange of high-tech and biotech personnel between and across university, government, industry sectors by creating policies that reduce barriers to attracting and retaining foreign nationals who seek to flourish and contribute to California's knowledge economy. I'm sorry if I went over time. Thank you.
No. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Mamura. And our next person is Adriana Tahanar. Dr. Tahanar, please.
Thank you, Senator. It's a pleasure and honor to be here and to witness the enthusiastic support for the vision and goals of the BRAIN Initiative, not only for promoting groundbreaking science, but also for helping the California economy. And I would like to tell you about the efforts of QB3 and other of the California Institutes for Science and Technology in addressing these two challenges for the last 13 years. But I would like to begin by emphasizing the importance of the biotechnology sector for the California economy. You can see the numbers here, and they speak for themselves. But it's important to realize that this is the result of an optimal environment where discoveries from the labs can effectively be transitioned into the commercialization pipeline. And this does not happen automatically. This was one of the realizations of Governor Gray Davis about 13 years ago, that these networking organizations are really necessary in order to truly nucleate a bioeconomy ecosystem. So QB3 sits at the center of many of the key players in this ecosystem. We interact with researchers at several universities. We're able to understand their science and to effectively promote partnerships and collaborations with industry. In addition, when a technology is ready to transition outside of the university, we have developed the tools to make startups efficient engines for making and mediating this transition. We're able to connect these startups to service providers to help them flourish and succeed. And we continually are in touch with government planners to develop new policies that support this ecosystem. It's important to point out, I'm sure everybody realizes, that universities are the engine for some of the most important technological discoveries of our time. However, in order for these discoveries to affect the growth of the bioeconomy, manufacturing is necessary. Production of these technologies must come into the picture. And startup companies are optimally positioned to do this, since they deeply understand the technology and they have the passion and the drive to take this to market. However, they encounter important challenges. And this is where QB3 comes in, to be able to connect the discoveries coming out of the university, address the challenges in their commercialization to build successful biotech companies. So what do we do in this respect? Because of our unique position at the university, we're able to connect labs working in complementary technologies, as well as connecting scientists with clinicians that understand the application of some of these technologies. This allows us to identify grand challenges, very much like the BRAIN initiative. Just to give you an example of one of the challenges that QB3 has decided to tackle is rejuvenation therapies. How can we stay younger longer? And this is very much aligned with the goals of the BRAIN initiative as well. What contributes to cognitive loss as we age, and how can we reverse that? This, of course, is not a simple question and will require a collaborative effort among scientists in many different disciplines. As one of the first steps towards addressing this grand challenge, we're organizing a symposium that will bring together scientists, industry experts, and funding decision makers to get this conversation started. And this could serve as a model of something that could be done as well for the BRAIN initiative. So once we identify these all-star teams, it's necessary to transition that technology to the market. In order to do this, we have a program called Startup in a Box to connect these scientists with the legal and financial resources that they need to establish their companies and to become operational by raising funding from small business grants. And I think it will be important to also use this vehicle as a source of funding for startups working in topics important for the BRAIN initiative. And just to give you an idea of the impact of this program, in the last 2 years, we've incorporated 150 companies coming out of UC universities and California at large. And over 30 of them are already operational, meaning that they are fueling the economic engine of California. In order to support these operational companies, we're also able to provide them with low cost and high quality space so that they can carry out their research. And they also have access to equipment and to a supportive community of entrepreneurs and to the university where they can continue to improve their technology. Our network includes 62 companies, and these companies have been able to bring 400 jobs to the state, and just last year, they were able to raise $150 million, really speaking to the power of startups as a way to not only achieve scientific goals, but also economic ones. And finally, we've established a venture fund to make some funds available for early stage companies and support their continued success. This model will also allow QB3 to become financially independent, and it also gives us the opportunity to interact more closely with corporate investment partners that can also provide strategic advice to our startups. This fund, Mission Bay Capital, is made possible by an outstanding advisory board of some of the most successful investors in this area. So I would like to close by highlighting a couple of opportunities for the BRAIN initiative. As I mentioned before, there's a lot of synergistic opportunities with the work that QB3 has done for the last 13 years. And especially in this new grand challenge that we're targeting, I think there's a lot of intersection with the BRAIN initiative. I would like to highlight the work of Professor Saul Villeda at UCSF, who's interested in understanding how aging contributes to cognitive loss and how to reverse that. So one of the experiments that he recently published consisted of connecting the circulatory system of an old and a young mouse so that soluble factors could be freely exchanged between these two mice. And what he discovered is that factors present in the blood of the young mouse were able to improve some of the neural functions of the old mouse. So this raises fascinating questions of what these factors are, how could they be used to help us address some of these big challenges in our society. So to close, I think some of the ways in which California can help the BRAIN initiative would be in really harnessing and using all the network and initiatives that are already present here, such as the California Institutes for Science and Innovation. And all of this with the goal of empowering neuroscientists to bring those great discoveries for an impact on society.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tahanar. Dr. Khan?
No slides. So being, I guess, the last speaker, I want to thank you so much for pulling all of this together. I would say, having heard all that we've heard this morning, I think there's a very simple summary message for you. Think big, act now. Think big, act now. Presidential grand challenges come along very rarely, and that's why this matters. The last one was in the late 90s. Before that, it was the Human Genome Project. I mean, they're spaced in time by at least a decade, sometimes more, and every challenge involves at least 10, 20, 30 years. What those challenges, however, do is they build a base on which the innovation economy of this country succeeds. To the degree we don't do that, we are harmed. And when I say we, I mean the people of the state, the people of the country, in every way. So think big, act now. And I think the state can make an enormous difference. If there's one thing that California has an extraordinary history of, it's leadership. And even if our country leads nationally and globally around the world, within the country, California plays a very special role. You should grab the brass ring now. That's the bottom line message. Context is, I think, important. And we have an extraordinary history. You gave me an opportunity to think about a different way of talking about this opportunity. And I realized in thinking about the state's history, the whole history, it's a history of innovation, risk-taking, risk-takers, and building, in the end, infrastructure that enables us to succeed. Of course, great universities are part of that infrastructure, and that's central to succeeding here. So the first lesson that told me was, we have the infrastructure to succeed, and we have the courage to do it because we've done it in the past. You know, when I thought about the start of the academics, 1850s to 1900, it was very interesting. Even then, it was public-private, public initiative, private philanthropy. And those are the three key elements that often enable everything to happen. You'll see it time and again if you look over this history. So we got UC formed and UCSF formed, you know, in the 1860s. Before 1900, we got Stanford formed. We got USC formed. And when you think about the formation of both Stanford and USC, there were financial people who were behind it. Whether it was Leland Stanford, who'd been a governor, but also very involved in the railroads, or if it was USC and it was Isaac Hellman, who founded the banking system in Los Angeles and then ultimately made Wells Fargo what it is today, right? They made the universities. That was only at the second half of the 19th century. Then we got Caltech, and we got UCLA in the first half. And in the second half, there was an extraordinary vision, our great Governor Brown, the first Governor Brown. And we had this extraordinary expansion of the UC system. So we are blessed with extraordinary academic infrastructure. But it's come from the public and visionaries, it's come from the privates, and it's come from the wealthy who are willing to recycle wealth. And one of the things that I think you can count on, without being able to predict exactly how, is that wealth will get recycled, and it will get recycled to help this initiative. Because we have a history of recycling wealth, from Carnegie to the Gates-Buffett pledge. Over 120 years, we recycle wealth. So it's a great history. I think you can also count on what's going to come out of this without being prescriptive by just looking again at history. Hewlett and Packard, TRW, the middle of TRW is Ramo. Ramo is Caltech. Arnold Beckman and Beckman Industries, again, California. So you go from the 30s and 40s and 50s and the building of those industries, computers and aerospace, et cetera, to Apple and Google and Yahoo, and the names go on and on. And interestingly, even with a company like Facebook, where did it end up? It didn't get invented in UC. It got invented at Harvard, but it ended up in Silicon Valley. So that's an example of where we have infrastructure. You support it, you enable it, it will happen. Biotech's amazing too, right? Genentech comes out of Stanford and UCSF. Amgen comes out of UCLA, two of the largest biotech companies in the world. So you know that if you make the investment, it's going to pay off. So I'd say we know how to do this. And I would say the state knows how to do it, and our political system knows how to do it. You know how to do it. If you think about the 60s and what we did with the universities, it was the political drive. It was vision at the political level that made it happen. It wasn't industry per se, and it wasn't, the rest of it. It was the political vision. I think in 2000, we've already heard of a political vision that led to these California institutes. And having been involved in enabling one and knowing the progress of the others, the return isn't measurable only in economics. It is measured also in the retention of extraordinary talent. So people come because of these institutes from elsewhere. We get an immigration from the rest of the country. And they stay because the opportunities are here. A key, I would say, is that the state needs to enable the desire to stay. But they have stayed. So QB3 has been enormously successful. CalIT2 has been enormously successful. Those were positive initiatives. That is, they were thought about in good times. The stem cell initiative was thought about in difficult times. There was a national debate not to pursue that at the federal level. I think the state made an enormously positive contribution to the country by enabling it within the state. And what did it do? When we got the ship righted, as it is now, California was again in a position to take a real leadership role. So these initiatives, whether it was done because there was a problem at the federal level or done because there were resources at the state level, both have been made an enormous difference. And you sit at a time now where the best time to start something is when things are bad. So we are sitting in a difficult economic climate. Jobs are tough. The state is finally turning itself around. I'm blessed that we passed the tax initiative so that we got the resources to recover. But it's tough times. So how do you make a decision in very difficult times to spend more money? If you don't invest at the bottom of a cycle, you will never capture the top. Right? So it's sort of the old adage, buy low, sell high. Now's the time to invest, because the federal government in this area will start with $100 million. I will predict to you, and I'll bet you a cup of coffee, that in 5 years the budget's $300 million a year. Who's going to capture that? And who's going to capture the benefit that will come from having captured the federal largesse? We should capture it. You should capture it. The state should capture it. And the only way to capture it is to invest now at the front end and invest earlier than others who don't have quite the vision. Other states may not have quite the vision. It'll put you in the right position. So the last comment then is about the role of philanthropy and contributions. Others have spoken about business. I did venture capital, and I had to start a company that went public, and I went through the whole business of, the fundamental rule, by the way, of a startup is don't run out of money.
I'll remember that.
I remember having a board member when I founded my company. It was a spin-out from UCLA in the late 80s. And he kept saying to me, Bob, the basic rule is don't run out of money. You know what the second rule is? Don't run out of money. And finally, there's a third rule, which is don't run out of money. And we did succeed, and we did have an IPO. And the industry is still a very powerful industry here in the state. It's a semiconductor equipment industry of applied materials and companies of that kind, where California still, to this day, leads, and they have led for 50 years. That's because we've had the research. So in any case, philanthropy. Philanthropy is reinvesting across the country, and you're seeing wealth being recycled. The Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation, based in Palo Alto, $6 billion foundation, spends $300 million a year, mostly here in the state, but also around the country. Where'd that come from? Gordon Moore was a founder of Intel. Irwin Jacobs and Andy Viterbi and others associated with Qualcomm here in San Diego come from UC, by the way. Andy was a professor at UCLA before Qualcomm started. Irwin Jacobs was a professor at UC San Diego. They got together in the early 70s, did Linkabit. Linkabit led to Qualcomm. The rest is history. And interestingly, by the way, it's all in California. Still, the two leading semiconductor companies in the world are in California, Intel and Qualcomm. It's extraordinary, the benefits, the UC linkage, because all those people came to California because they wanted to be with UC. Right. So they give back was where I was coming from. And the philanthropy of the people like, there's the Viterbi School at USC, there's the Jacobs School here at UC San Diego, there's the Samueli School at Irvine and at UCLA. There's a recycling that goes on. And so you can count on philanthropy to invest. I don't think you can ask specifically just how much. Just look at the history and you know they'll be there. So I'll use ourselves as an example. Yesterday, the good UC Berkeley announced a new 17th Kavli Institute, this one in energy nanosciences, of which you heard remarks this morning. It's a $10 million gift, plus another $1 million to make sure that they get off the ground with a running start. We asked them to match that $10 million. They already raised $5 million, and they raised the $5 million before we even made the announcement. And they'll raise the other $5 million in 3 years. And so these kind of institutes will have a $20 million endowment. It will give them $1 million a year. And somebody said, get smart people, give them the money, and let them go. And the Kavli Foundation has taken that as a fundamental philosophy. So endowment gifts do not ask, what will you do? They simply say, spend it wisely, we trust you, the money goes into the Berkeley endowment, we don't keep it, and the scientists use it for what they believe is the best use. Usually that's their wildest, craziest ideas that are not yet ready for prime time, and therefore not ready for a federal proposal. But once they do it, there's an extraordinary payback. And over the last 10 years, we've done now 17 institutes around the globe. 11 are in the United States, and 5 of those 11 are now in California. That tells you something, too. So I guess I would close by saying, now's the time to catalyze the state to take advantage of this coming initiative. And the only specific proposal, I don't have 7 or 10 or 15, is invest now and think big. And the minimum to thinking big, in my view, is $200 million. You need it for the infrastructure to succeed. If you don't have the buildings and the equipment in place so that the scientists can write the proposals, move into the space, and do the work that will be transformative, there's no future. And the state can do that in a way that nobody else can. So one of the things I think you can think about is infrastructure support. That amounts to new buildings, new labs, the place where the work will get done. You can do it by a number of funding mechanisms. There surely needs to be some spread around the state. It won't be just one institute. You may have a minimum of 2. But I think $100 million per whatever entity you think about would be the right scale to take advantage of the $100 million next year from the feds, $300 million in 5 years, going on for a decade or more. The payback to the state will be enormous. Thanks.
Thank you very much. How about a round of applause for this panel? I think we've dispelled the rumor that people to come to California for the weather. They come for the education and the innovation, right?
How true, how true.
Yes. So,
but the weather's not bad.
yes, that's the nice side. That's the nice sidelight, especially here in San Diego. I think I will try to ask one question, and then we do have to move to public comment. So I'm sorry we'll not have lengthy questions for this panel. But I think the one thing that I thought I'd like to have an answer to is, you know, often in the legislature when we start talking about private investment in universities, especially state universities in research, we get this sort of, you know, the danger signal goes up. What about, you know, what about the concern about having the ability for, you know, the research to be done without a business incentive getting in the way of that? Or I think you know what I'm talking about. So help me figure out how we look at this in a new way to determine ways that we can create these, you know, public-private partnerships for this investment by private industry, which obviously is important if we're going to go forward, especially with something like the BRAIN initiative.
I can speak to that. Whenever we accept corporate-sponsored research projects at the university, we do so in ways that are consistent with the mission and goals of a great research university. That is, industry can't tell us what to do. They can't say, I'll give you the money if you do precisely this. The professors propose the projects, and industry funds it or not. And the professors direct the work of the students and postdocs, all of which is published. So we're preserving academic freedom. We're preserving the role that we play, which is discovery research. We're treading just a little bit further into the applied or translational research area, but we are definitely not doing commercial research. We also are still doing things for our own purposes, you know, to advance a student towards the dissertation or to help a postdoc at their next job. But we do not become the handmaiden of industry by accepting industry funding. And there are many safeguards in place to make sure that we don't do that. And also the academic enterprise itself is self-regulating. I mean, we're a professor to accept industry funding and then do something that is truly commercial. It wouldn't advance the professor in terms of promotion and tenure standards because it would not be novel research that can be published in a peer-reviewed journal.
Mm-hmm. So there are safeguards. Any other
Could
thoughts
I
on
add
that?
something
Yes,
to
please.
that? The other caution I would have, I heard a lot of discussion even in our panels about translation and application. And it's just natural. One wants to see this application and translation occur as fast as possible. But you cannot pressure discovery. You can create an environment for it. You can put the building up and the infrastructure in and put the mines inside. And then you have to let it percolate and let it come out in the way that it does. So one of the cautions I would have is to ensure that there isn't over-prescriptiveness. The problem can be over-prescribed because there's such a strong desire to see positive outcome from the investment. But history shows you all the positive outcome that comes from the basic research. But if you over-prescribe, you won't get the people focused on the most fundamental questions. So, we fund basic science. And I mean it. We fund basic science. And we don't ask that you have to do this, or you have to do that. We don't ask for intellectual property back. We say, you own everything, you own everything. Create the seed corn for the future. That's what the basic scientific results are. So as you think about, on the one hand, industry involvement and translation, if the translation becomes too large a driver of what is going on, I'm convinced that it will restrict the discovery engine. And it's the discovery engine that gives you what you translate. So that's a very delicate balance that one has to just keep in mind and keep sensible in order that the discoveries that really come that you actually want.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
If I could follow up on that, I think it's important to realize the stage at which these monies become very valuable for university researchers. We've heard about the valley of death and about the point where there are still key technical risks that need to be addressed, but it's not at a point where it can apply for small business grants, for instance. So these pre-commercial collaborations and partnerships with industry can be very valuable still at the university stage.
Okay, thank you.
I just wanted to add an anecdote which reinforces this. Early on in our program, as you mentioned, we also hold the line, the faculty propose, and then the industry partner decides whether to support it. So faculty proposed things, and the industry partner, big one, Ericsson in this case, came back and said, come back with something longer term. And when we got to become friends with them, they said, would we trust a professor and his or her graduate students to solve our immediate problems? We have thousands of engineers who know how to do that. What we can't do is this real long-term crazy thinking, right? So they look to us not to solve their immediate problems, but to think boldly, go where they can't go. So I don't think there is a conflict here.
Okay. I'm very happy to hear that. Thank you very much. Let's give another round of applause for this great panel. Thank you so very much. We're going to move now to the public comment period, and I'm going to make a few closing remarks, and then I'll close it out after the public comment. But if anybody would like to speak, please come up to the microphone, and we'll start with you in just a moment. I just want to thank everybody for being here for the discussion this morning. I'm very thrilled with the outcome. I think that we've gotten some great synergy here, people already talking about working together on future plans. I plan to take these ideas back to the Capitol and introduce legislation in the next session. I haven't quite figured out what I'm going to do yet, but I'd like to continue the conversation with all of you to support the efforts of the BRAIN Initiative and address some of the issues that we've talked about today. So thank you very much. Let me definitely thank, of course, UC San Diego, and I especially want to thank David Schroeder and Courtney Giordano for all of the work they did to help us put this together today. So thank you very much for that. And I also want to thank Dan Cucci from my staff and Guadalupe Manriquez, who is here today. Other staffers that were involved in it too were Samantha David, Sean Conley, and Rebecca Nieto, my chief of staff. Thank you very much for organizing this hearing. A lot of work goes into making sure the senator knows what she's talking about when she's learning about the MIND initiative and going to San Diego to do so. So I appreciate all of your collective help. So pardon me for giving the closing comments before you spoke, but I also have to catch a plane. So I want to make sure we all get a chance to speak. And if we take until 12:30 for public comments, we will be able to make it all happen. So please respect each other's time. Thank you so much for all of you for being here, also who are staying in line to make a comment. Please, sir, just say your name and your affiliation and what you'd like to talk about.
Good. I'm Larry Goldstein. I'm director of the UC San Diego Stem Cell Program and scientific director of the Sanford Consortium for Regenerative Medicine, which is an outgrowth of Prop 71, which I was one of the architects of.
Thank you.
Senator, thank you for your time in looking at this important area. I really have two very brief and hopefully non-redundant comments that spring off what Bob Kahn said. So, comment number one, act now. So we have built this incredible stem cell infrastructure in California through big, thoughtful investment. And part of solving the secrets of the brain will come from our ability on a daily basis to make human brain cells in the lab and to coax them to form connections. And so we're at the beginning of building bottom up to solve networks, disease, and investment in the Brain Initiative will really be able to leverage off of that existing initiative, I think, in a really terrific way, and the timing is perfect to do that. Second, think big. Again, quoting Bob Kahn. So California, to remind you, is 10% of the United States, and I think that 10% leads to a rule that I think is important to remember. We pay more than 10% of our share of the federal budget. We have less than 10% of political clout in getting anything done. If California in charge, the federal government would not be closed today.
You're right about that.
That's right. So we have less than 10% of the clout, but we have way more than 10% of the ability to capitalize on investment in science, and the federal government is not investing enough in brain initiatives, stem cells, medicine, science in general. And it's time for California to remember it's as big as most nations, and it's time that we invest in ourselves.
Yes.
And if we do so, we will reap the benefits.
Yes.
Thank you for your
And
time.
I appreciate your encouragement. And I just want to say, as a state legislator, it's we feel this all the time. We do understand that we make much more of a contribution and it doesn't have its return. So trust me, we're very focused on this, and I plan to be even more vocal about this as we move forward, especially based on what I've heard here today. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator.
And thank you for your leadership
Because
as
we
well.
do need to take care of ourselves now, I think.
Yes, we do. Yes, sir.
Good afternoon, Senator.
Good afternoon.
I'm Bill Comer. I'm founder and CEO of Neurogenetic Pharmaceuticals. I came here in '91 after being president of R&D and licensing for Bristol Myers, Big Pharma. And I came here to find out what causes and how to fix Alzheimer's disease, having just lost my mother. And it's been a long haul. We've seen a lot of things fail, and a lot of things that we didn't know a few years ago are coming to light. The first Alzheimer's Disease Research Center is located here in La Jolla, and now it's the seat of many others. We've learned that you can't fix what's already broken if the brain cells are dead. So we're into prevention, and we've developed a drug which we believe is going to get us there, in that we turn off what is causing the problem. That means you have to diagnose early. The diagnosis early is really coming to fruition. Now, we not only can look at the plaque and the other problems in the brain, but we're setting up rating scales to be able to spot this early. Last week, it was even recognized that the gene we now know is responsible for normal aging dementia or cognitive loss. So we can distinguish that from Alzheimer's. Now, with the rating scales and mapping to the brain and being able to correlate the behavior in these rating scales with brain pathology, physiology, we're on the verge of being able to diagnose early and treat early. So I, again, ask you to not just think big and think locally, but we believe that bringing other companies to put their research centers here, because this is the innovation center, this is the way California can reach out and remain number one.
Thank you very much.
Good afternoon.
Good
My name is
afternoon.
Teresa Andrews, and I'm with Connect. Connect is a nonprofit organization that was birthed out of University of California, San Diego over 25 years ago. Our mission is to propel creative ideas and emerging technologies to the marketplace by training these entrepreneurs and connecting them with the resources they need in order to sustain their viability and business vibrancy. Since 1985, Connect has assisted in the formation and the development of over 3,000 companies. Since 2005, these Connect Springboard companies have raised close to $2 billion in investment capital. We're here today to show our support for a statewide initiative that will promote and encourage innovators and entrepreneurs to solve one of the last unknowns in the human body, which is mapping the active brain. As you know, President Obama and his BRAIN initiative has been considered the next human genome project. This has been a major success in saving both patient lives and economically to our nation. Connect advocates that California is the state of ideas and the state of risk takers. We are typically on the forefront of major technological breakthroughs, and the states and its residents were on the forefront by setting up the California Institute for Regenerative Medicine, which has led to a strong biotechnology sector that is attracting investment capital, creating jobs, and finding discoveries that are saving lives today. We feel that California should lead the nation again with the statewide initiative and be on the forefront of mapping the active brain. Many researchers today believe that the BRAIN initiative could possibly unlock the secrets behind complex diseases like Alzheimer's and autism. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That's why we're here today.
I want to thank you again, Senator, for coming and setting this up. My name is Patsy Shoulders. I'm here to represent the San Diego Brain Injury Foundation for one thing, but I'm vice president now. I was past president. The reason I got involved was because I nearly got killed by a head-on collision that caused a TBI many years ago. I will say that this becomes personal to people. There is no one-size-fit-all for give a drug or give one therapy for creating the afterlife that one would hope to have when all the years you put into your forelife. So it's personal to us. Are there any survivors here in this audience? Okay. Do we have some caregivers that have been together and family members? And then those professionals that work with this population. We are just have been working together and collaborating wherever we can for the longest time, because the brain is, when you have an injury, it not only goes off for your life, but it's like someone dropped a bomb in your whole world. Your family and your finances and your working abilities may sometimes be affected. I was definitely affected. It changes you forever. I was sort of wandering, dazed and confused for a long time, even though I could work. I finally went back to school, got my master's. I did my master's thesis on asking brain injury survivors, what helped you the most? What hindered you the most? And what would you like the public to know? How to help you? Because, you know, if for nothing else, for financial reasons, stroke alone, in lost wages, in all the different therapies, in all the caregivers, in divorces and lawyer fees. Stroke alone costs America $33 billion a year. And so if we can get technologies like this, hopefully that we're finally on a wave that's actually going to break and we can ride the board that we've been building forever to try to get some real help by diagnosing early, by preventative medicine that will create the diagnostic tools that we can maybe even reverse some of these things that last forever. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your advocacy.
Hi, I'm Wendy Pincus. I'm a returning graduate student. I'm studying neuroscience, and I am also a survivor from a brain injury 33 years ago. And if I didn't come to UCSD and study neuroscience, I don't want to imagine where I'd still be. And every time I fight with doctors on the East Coast, I end up coming back here to figure out where the Brain Initiative is. And I must say that the San Diego Brain Injury Foundation helped me a lot when I was an undergraduate, but I now work with the TBI USA, and I'm finding it very difficult to find any help anywhere except here at UCSD. I have been fighting state after state after state with this disability, and I have had no change anywhere in this country except in San Diego. So I keep returning here every 10 years to find out where the Brain Initiative is, and I have to thank everyone at UCSD for letting me get this far.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Julia Brown. I'm a trustee here at the university, and I come from the life science industry, specifically biopharmaceuticals. Like everyone else, Senator Corbett, I want to thank you for your interest in this really important topic and for getting us together this morning. In your opening comments, you mentioned the study that said Human Genome Project had returned $141 for every dollar invested in R&D. To that, I'd add the impact of the internet. While that has become a trillion-dollar economy, and while I haven't seen that expressed as a return on R&D dollar invested, I have seen the impact that it's had on the charts of the U.S. GDP. Yes. So my hope is that we'll be able to do the same thing with this initiative. One of your early questions was, why is now the right time? Dr. Sanjowski and Chun responded that science is ready to take this on as the next frontier. Then Dr. Greenspan and Medeiros talked about the critical unmet medical needs and described some of the pathologies in this particular area. I would add to that the populations of patients that are afflicted by those are growing at very, very rapid rates. So what's a big problem today, a huge unmet medical need today, is getting even larger, and the consequences are devastating. Dr. Greenspan talked about the fact that we really need to understand the pathologies better if we're to develop important new interventions. You know, as someone from the industry trying to do that, like Dr. Medeiros, I come from the drug development industry, we don't even have objective ways of diagnosing the diseases or measuring whether our interventions are effective. For many of them, all we have are composite symptom scores, which are qualitative in nature. And we don't have time to talk right now about all the problems that creates with doing clinical trials. But let it suffice to say that it ends up making the risk in this area so great that many of the big companies have abandoned it, despite the size of the unmet medical need. So I'm thrilled that we're doing this initiative. I'm thrilled that California is again in a position to provide leadership, and I'm very optimistic that it'll give us the knowledge that we need to develop important new interventions. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Cara Lucier. I'm here as the mother of a child with autism and on behalf of Autism Tree Project Foundation and the autism community. What I wanted to tell you and everyone here is that when my son was diagnosed in 2006, the best science on autism was coming out of UCLA. But what it involved was pepper spray sprayed in the face of a child with autism to get them to stop acting autistic. That was the best science had for me in 2006, and it was not acceptable. Since 2006, UC Davis Mind Institute, UCSD has come out with studies, and we track them and we watch them, but they're scattered, and it's very difficult to come up with a coherent understanding of autism and how to treat it. This has such dire consequences on our community. I have friends who have literally gone bankrupt, flying their children to third world countries to get risky treatments that are not proven and maybe not safe. So thank you for the Brain Initiative for bringing this concept to reality, because this is a beacon of hope for the autism community.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Hi, and thank you for listening. My name is Sharon Leon, and I am the mother of 2 boys. My oldest son has autism. I'm also the executive director for the National Foundation for Autism Research, and my husband and I founded IMFAR in 2003 to help meet the critical need for autism awareness, funding for research, autism treatment programs, and services. What we know is that autism affects the brain of a child very early on in the 2nd trimester, and it's very important that we gain better understanding as to what is happening in the brain so that we can help My hope is that we can help to prevent autism from occurring and really help the millions of children that are coming, as well as really change the way that we treat autism. My hope is that we can really understand the processes in the brain so that we can turn off the production of what isn't working and turn on what needs to happen. You know, we work in San Diego, and it's not just because we're based here, but because we have world-class research and educational institutions, medical institutions, as well as a vibrant biotechnology community. But we also have over 10,000 families directly impacted by autism, and we have an active autism community that's really dedicated to finding out what's happening in autism and wanting to see those breakthroughs happen so that we can finally figure out, you know, the autism puzzle. So thank you. Okay, thank you.
Hi, my name is Ken Darling. I'm an ambassador with the Alzheimer's Association, but more importantly, I was a caregiver full-time for my mother, who had the disease for 15 years. Alzheimer's at first slowly robbed her memory, took it away. As the brain continued to deteriorate, it took away her physical abilities also, simple tasks such as feeding herself, dressing herself, eventually walking, and then lastly, she forgot how to swallow. My mother passed away from the disease, and with Alzheimer's, there are no survivors. My goal and my desire is to see that nobody has to go through what she went through and us as a family also. So I'm thankful for the opportunity to speak to you today and to express the importance of the Brain Initiative. And I do know that a good investment in research will give a lot of families hope. But I also want to speak to its urgency because right now over 5 million people have this disease. And it's growing. Every 68 seconds somebody develops Alzheimer's. It's the 6th leading cause of death nationally. It's the 5th leading cause of death here in California. It's the only cause of death in the top 10 that has no way to be prevented, cured, or even slowed. Right now, it's the most expensive disease, and the total cost in 2013 is projected to be at $203 billion. As you can see, Alzheimer's is devastating, both emotionally and economically. And I'd like to see, you know, a partnership between government, the private sector, academia, and nonprofits like the Alzheimer's Association just join together to give us that hope we need. Thank you.
So I'm Stuart Lipton. I'm an MD, PhD. Ralph Greenspan asked me to make a few comments. I'm the scientific director at Sanford Burnham, so I'm a basic scientist, but I'm also a clinician at UCSD. So I do very basic science, but I see a lot of patients with these diseases we're talking about, including some that are in the room. So the point I want to make is that not only is this a tremendous economic possibility, a tremendous economic gain can be made by the state. So I'm probably best known as the developer of the latest drug for Alzheimer's. Doesn't work that well, Namenda, but it's a $1.8 billion drug annually. So there's a tremendous economic gain here, but we need much better drugs. These are network diseases, autism, Alzheimer's, TBI, you've been hearing about them. So we need the basic science that Bob talked about to understand these diseases. And then we need this translational science to work with the scientists. So what is my point? This is probably the only state, maybe the only place in the world this could work because it's very collaborative and very entrepreneurial. I spent 25 years at Harvard. I moved here about 12 years ago. And the reason I'm here is because how collaborative and entrepreneurial. This is a very special place, and this state has a real opportunity to gain from this by pulling together with your initiative. So thank you for being here.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for your leadership and for coming here today. I'm Philip Lowe. I was a graduate student in Terry Sinofsky's lab, where I founded a company called Neurovigil We've been very fortunate and very lucky. We went on the market in 2009 with Hoffmann La Roche. We're going to announce a new major deal next week. We have offices here and at NASA in Silicon Valley. It seems to me quite obvious that we are right now at the epicenter of the world's greatest brain trust. A number of people in this very room are architects of the Brain Initiative, which will not only create tremendous returns for California, but for the world at large. One of the things that I think is missing is this translational element. And so we've been working very hard here in order to collaborate not only with local leaders, so Salk Institute, UCSD, Qualcomm, but also the White House, foreign governments, the Singaporean government, the French government, Canadian government, the Israeli government, in order to create something quite unique here in San Diego, which would be an enterprise zone for newer technology. And we feel that this would very much de-risk the translational efforts that are necessary in order to take a drug and commercialize it or a therapy. So next week I have to go to Congress to meet with Congressman Fatah and Kathy McMorris-Rogers. We have an interest in this initiative at all levels of government. We haven't yet heard from the state. So without wanting to be a spoiler, rather than just ask comment on things, I'd like to ask a question. What can the state do in order to help accelerate this particular initiative? I do. I'm not sure you do.
This as well, so that we can do whatever we can do to help foster the support for this initiative, because I saw it before today, but I especially see today how very important it is that we do what we can also to make sure that it's successful, because the promise and the promise for the cures and the amazing things that will happen as a result of it are just amazing. But also a little selfish part is, this will be very important to our local and state economy as well. But I think it's very, very worthy, and I think that the state of California should be very, very focused on doing whatever it can to support the efforts here.
Well, thank you for your leadership.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Senator. I'm Lisa Marvin. I work here at UCSD, but I'm here to talk to you today as a parent, a mom of a sweet, funny, loving 6-year-old boy who has autism. My husband and I have said probably hundreds of times to each other, if we could just get in his brain for 5 minutes and understand what he's thinking, what he's feeling. When we heard about this brain mapping initiative, we feel like that's the next best thing. That's why we support it, and I want to say thank you.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome.
Hi, my name is Maya Sapirka, and I'm a graduate student here at UCSD in the Neuroscience Graduate Program. And I want to thank all of the parents and caretakers who have come here to speak to their experience working with neurological disorders. But I'd also like to say that I'm a graduate student. My work isn't necessarily translational to Alzheimer's, but there's still so much that we can learn just from these non-translational sciences. I know so many of my fellow students study things that aren't necessarily going to lead to the cure for Alzheimer's or help us understand autism, but I feel like this brain initiative is so important because it'll give us the tools to answer our own research questions, which might lead to things that we can't even imagine. And so I just want to say that there's a lot of non-translational basic science that can come out of this, and just to think for these technologies of what we don't even know we might learn in the future.
Thank you very much. And I just want to say something very quickly. I'm very touched and pleased that we did have students here in the audience today to be here to witness this hearing and also to speak up. So thank you very, very much for taking time out of your busy studies to be with us. Yes,
I
Dr.
wanna make
Greenspan, you get the final word.
One final comment, particularly
Oh, maybe
to
not.
follow up on that last comment, because that really did raise a very important point that is very rarely brought out. And that is that the major breakthroughs in biomedicine and in technology come from undirected research that is not aiming at the problems that they eventually solve. There was actually a statistical survey of this done and published in Science magazine some years ago, which I hand out to everybody I can find, because it truly documents the truth of that finding. That if you aim at solving a problem, you can sometimes get there, but not for the hardest ones. And the answers to the hardest ones come from directions that you could never have predicted, and they don't even necessarily start out having anything to do with it. On that note, I'd like to express for everybody here our very, very deep felt thanks to you and your staff members and to all of you who are taking an interest in this. As you can tell, we are passionate about it and have no doubt that this is going to be of extraordinary value, and any help we can get is enormously appreciated.
Thank you so much. I'm very pleased to be here too. Thank you very much. And one last speaker, 1 minute.
So very quickly, so earlier you had asked one of the panels what could be done to help get the legislature.
Oh,
Oh,
yes,
I'm sorry.
please tell
My
us
name
who.
is, I'll take 2 steps back. My name is Justin Kiggins. I'm a PhD student in the Neurosciences graduate program here at UCSD. And earlier you had asked what we can do to help get the legislature excited and interested in neuroscience. And I'd just like to throw out that we actually have a group that does outreach in high schools that actually brings brains and live neurons into the classrooms. And I'm sure that they would be very happy to come up to the legislature. And if we can get high school kids excited, I'm sure that we can get all of y'all excited too.
You're on. I'm going to take you up on that. Thank you very much. So I would like to just close very quickly. Just a couple more thank yous. Our caucus media staff has been here today filming so that people around the state and around the world, for that matter, can learn about the BRAIN Initiative and become supporters of the BRAIN Initiative. So thank you for you being here as well. And obviously our Sergeant of Arms have been here with us as well, helping set up and make sure we're all secure as well. So I want to thank you also for being here and taking part in the hearing today. I'm very pleased that I came to San Diego today to hear from all of you, and I am so very impressed with all of the testimony I heard today and the public comments. You know, clearly we're at just the very beginning edge of just this amazing, I don't even have a word to describe it, amazing, big thinking, blue sky initiative that can make such a difference in the world for so many people. And just lead to more and more research and innovation. And again, I mean, it's infinitesimal or whatever that word is. So it's just, I'm just pleased to be with all of you and the fact that you've taken the time. I'm very, very impressed with what you all have done, your research to date and your expertise and your commitment, by the way, to this field, your fields of science and what you are doing. And I hope we can also work together to use you as an inspiration for other students that will be coming up behind you who will have to complete the work and continue the work of the MIND Initiative, because I think this is going to go on for many, many years. I don't see an end to the amazing innovation that will come from this. So thank you all for being here for that. The legislature is a great place to seek support. Legislation can make a huge difference in innovation. You know, as we know, in California, we're very much known for our innovation, but we also are known for particular areas of innovation. If you take a look at what has been happening in the energy field and the cutting-edge technologies that come from that, a lot of that is driven because of the policies that have been passed by the state legislature, demanding change and a difference for our future. And those are the same sorts of things, that same sort of idea and that philosophy to make change can occur with the MIND Initiative as well. So I look forward to a continuing partnership with all of you and the opportunity to start to figure out where's the best way to go with initial legislation in supporting what you're doing. And thank you so much. You're all going to be hearing from me. And I hope I hear from you too. Thank you all very much. It's been a pleasure to be here. Thank you.